FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326, The Los Angeles Central Library Theft. Hearing what Lassie said, Mona got up from Luo An's arms. Luo An was not panicked. He straightened up and asked calmly, "Which phone did you call, Michelle?" Since the special investigation team was announced to be on holiday on Tuesday, Michelle has been living a life of a stay-at-home girl. Michelle has 3 phones in total, one for dealing with non-urgent situations such as insurance companies and landlords, one for contacting relatives, friends, and former colleagues on weekdays, and the last one for answering the task calls from Luo An's special investigation team. Most of the time, Lassie called Michelle on the second phone, but except for the third phone, Michelle would easily choose to refuse the first 2 because of reading, so Luo An asked Lassie this question. "I called the second and third." Lassie on the other end of the phone explained, "Michelle ran out of food these days, and she asked me for help to send her some food. But when I arrived at her door, I found that no one was at home, and I couldn't get in touch with her by phone. In order to read more books these days, Michelle ate all the fast food she had bought before." Okay. Luo An frowned slightly when he heard this. Although Michelle was obsessed with reading, she could distinguish the important from the unimportant and rarely failed to contact her. After a few seconds of hesitation, Luo An said to the phone, "Lassie, please check the surveillance of Michelle's room and that building carefully. I'll go." Before Luo An finished speaking, Mona's phone rang suddenly. Mona picked it up and saw that it was Michelle's call. Luo An immediately stopped talking. Mona pressed the answer button with a serious expression. After a few seconds, her face became strange. After hanging up the phone, Mona looked at Luo An with a puzzled face in front of her and said with a smile, "Michelle is now at the LAPD. The books in the Los Angeles library were lost. The LAPD suspected that Michelle was a thief." Half an hour later, in the LAPD police station, after Luo An showed Mona and Lassie his identity, he quickly found out the whole incident from a sheriff. Around 11 o'clock last night, LAPD received a report from the Los Angeles Central Library saying that they found that the library's alarm system had been damaged, and then found that the original copies of some of the library's rare books had been stolen. The original copies of those rare books were very valuable, and LAPD immediately dispatched police upon learning of the incident and quickly retrieved surveillance footage from inside and outside the library. Then LAPD discovered from the library surveillance and the library's borrowing records that 2 weeks ago, Michelle had come to the library many times to borrow copies of those books, had not come to the library a week ago, and then came to the library again 3 days ago to borrow copies of those books. The timing was really a bit of a coincidence, so LAPD treated Michelle as one of the suspects and asked her to come to the LAPD police station to cooperate with the investigation. After figuring out the whole story, and with the guarantees provided by Lassie and others, Michelle soon walked out of the LAPD police station. "Michelle, you really scared us." Mona's car slowly moved forward. Lassie patted Michelle's arm and said with a smile, "I thought you were robbed." Michelle looked apologetic. "I'm really sorry. I'm glad you're okay." Luo An sat in the co-pilot, glanced at the rearview mirror, and asked casually, "By the way, which books were stolen from the Los Angeles Central Library?" "Mainly some books and manuscripts of European and American themes from 1000 to 1500 AD. When talking about this, Michelle's eyes lit up. "They are all very valuable books. After I came to Los Angeles, I submitted an application to the library to view the manuscripts, but it was never approved. I was ready to use the FBI as a case." X3 Luo An and the other 2 heard this and cast strange looks at Michelle. If the 3 didn't know that Michelle had been squatting at home these days, and that Michelle's physical fitness was average, her interpersonal relationships in Los Angeles were simple, and she was not very good at computers, they would have begun to suspect that Michelle was the thief who stole these books. Seeing the looks of the 3 people, Michelle was slightly stunned, and then a little embarrassed. "Sorry, it's okay." Luo An replied casually. "Mona, who was driving, thought for a while and asked, "Michelle, you just said that those books are very valuable. Do you mean in terms of knowledge or money? This case belongs to the LAPD. If the library does not ask the FBI for help, the FBI will not intervene actively. Even if the FBI intervenes, there is no need for their special investigation team to be dispatched, so Mona is just a little curious about it. Both levels." Hearing Mona's question, Michelle thought for a moment and explained, "There is no need to say much about the knowledge level. Many experts and professors in the Federation have completed their research based on the originals of those books and materials. As for the money," Michelle scratched his head and paused for a few seconds before saying, "If they are very fond of this kind of books, they will most likely offer a very high price." Lassie was also curious when she heard this and asked, "How high is very high?" $200,000 to $800,000. Michelle said, "It may also exceed $800,000. Wow." Lassie opened her mouth and sighed, and Luo An smiled. This is the value of knowledge. The four of them returned to Michelle's house, talking and laughing all the way. Mona and Lassie had been here before, but only Luo An was here for the first time. After entering the room and taking a look around, and then hearing Michelle's own introduction, Luo An raised his eyebrows and found that Michelle in life and Michelle at work were completely two different people. Michelle at work is serious about doing things, never dragging his feet, and conscientiously completes every task. There is no jewelry on her body for decoration, her clothes are decent, and her mental state is very good. Michelle said that her daily routine was very chaotic these days. She would sleep when she felt tired while reading, and continue reading when she woke up. She would draw the curtains and turn on the lights, and she had no idea whether it was day or night outside. She ate fast food, but the scene in the room was not as messy as imagined, but in good order. On the left side of the living room were several piles of books and a desk, where Michelle read and took notes. On the right side of the living room was the bedroom, which had only a folding bed and a long clothes hanger. Michelle usually slept and changed clothes here. Most of the clothes on the hanger were clothes that Michelle wore when she went to work. There were only a few clothes in her daily life, less than 1/10 of Mona's. In addition, the whole room was very clean. The garbage was sorted and placed outside the door, and the food was placed within reach. Michelle herself was a little messy except for her clothes and hair, but everything else was very clean. Seeing Michelle, who had almost suppressed her desires for eating, drinking and having fun to the lowest level, Luo An had nothing to say except admiration. He helped her repair the broken lamp, and then prepared to leave with Mona and Lassie. Lassie shook her head and said she would leave later because she wanted to ask Michelle something. Her mysterious look aroused the curiosity of Ron and Mona, but Lassie refused to say anything, so Ron and Mona did not ask any more questions and left. Chapter 327 Hollywood Billionaire Shot. On the way home, this time it was Luo An who drove. Mona sat in the passenger seat and was silent for a long time. Suddenly, she turned around and asked with a smile, "Ron, Lassie doesn't want to be with Michelle, does she?" "Probably not." Ron shook his head when he heard that. "Lassie is a very loyal person. She only likes young, beautiful, and well-built girls between 18 and 25 years old. Michelle is 29 years old this year. Her appearance and figure are all average. She is not within Lassie's range of choices at all." Mona's mouth twitched when she heard that, and then her eyebrows raised. "What about you, Ron? What kind of girl do you like?" "Of course I like you like this." The experienced Ron easily avoided the pit that Mona dug for herself. Mona was very happy with just a few simple sweet words. Ron smiled and continued, "I think the question that Lassie asked Michelle is probably about what a literary woman like Michelle likes more." Ron's words were not groundless. A few days ago, when he went out for lunch, he saw Lassie flirting with a female college student waitress wearing glasses who was working and studying in a restaurant. Although the waitress looked a bit rustic, Ron, with his good eyesight, was sure that if she changed her hairstyle and clothes, she would definitely be as good as those Hollywood stars. When Lassie was chatting with the girl, Ron found that the girl's conversation, outlook on life and values were more literary. In addition, Lassie had taken several books that she had borrowed from Michelle, but had hardly read when she went out these days, so Ron made the judgment just now. After listening to Roan's words, Mona yawned and put Lass's matter behind her. She usually had no interest in Lass's private life. She asked Roan this question just now, but Lass's mysterious look just now aroused her curiosity. Saturday night passed quickly, and on Sunday, Roan and Mona continued to travel around Los Angeles. During the period, the two met the FBI's #1 investigation team. They walked up to say hello, and learned that the LAPD said that they were unable to handle the theft of books from the Los Angeles library, so they handed the case over to the FBI. "Thank you for your hard work." Patting the shoulders of the two detectives of the #1 investigation team, Luo An handed the coffee he had just bought to them, and then left the scene with Mona with a smile. "Thank you, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood." The two detectives took the coffee and thanked him repeatedly. One of the short-haired detectives looked at the backs of Luo An and Mona and was very emotional. They are both investigation teams of the Criminal Investigation Department. Why does the work of the Special Investigation Team seem so easy? You think too much. Another older detective took a sip of coffee and said with a smile, "That's because Deputy Team Leader Greenwood is good enough, which makes you feel that the work of the Special Investigation Team is easy." Well, the short-haired detective wanted to discuss his team leader of the #1 investigation team, but after thinking about it, he swallowed the words. "Let's go and continue working." Okay. The day of Sunday passed quickly. After Luo An experienced Mona's clever little surprise again, he started a new week of work. Monday, the office area of the Special Investigation Team. "Good morning, everybody." Roan pushed open the door of the investigation team while eating breakfast. "How was your weekend?" Mona rolled her eyes at Roan without answering, walked to her seat, opened the package, and started eating breakfast. Lassie didn't answer Roan either, but her face was full of smiles at this time, and her smile was full of pride. Michelle swallowed the breakfast in her mouth and replied to Roan seriously, "I read books all day on Sunday and had a great time." "Good." After finishing breakfast in a few bites, Roan took out his mobile phone from his pocket, shook it and said, "Everyone, get ready for work. The LAPD has sent us a new gift. A street in central Los Angeles." Roan and Lassie parked the SUV on the side of the road. Not far away from them, several LAPD police cars surrounded a silver grey convertible sports car in the middle. A circle of isolation belts was drawn around the police cars. Several LAPD patrol officers stood outside the isolation belts, trying to maintain order and prevent the group of media with cameras and microphones from crowding into the scene. "Wow, you're worthy of being a Los Angeles journalist." Lassie followed Roan and slowly walked towards the scene, raised her watch to check the time. "From the time we received the notification from LAPD to the time we arrived at the scene, it seemed like less than 20 minutes. If you were a reporter, you would definitely be fired." Roan grinned when he heard that. If it took these reporters more than 10 minutes to arrive at the scene of the crime, their positions would have been taken away by their colleagues long ago. Lassie shook her head. "Crazy Los Angeles. No, it should be the sick Hollywood." After casually correcting Lassie's words, Roan took out the gold badge to show his identity, then lifted the isolation tape and entered the scene. An LAPD sheriff came over and stretched out his hand and said, "Hello, Deputy Greenwood, I'm Yarland." "Hello, Sheriff Yarland." Roan stretched out his hand and shook it, then asked, "What was the situation at the scene?" "When the victim died, he was driving and talking to his lawyer on the phone." Yarland took Roan to the silver grey convertible sports car, pointed at the body in the car and said, "The lawyer heard 2 gunshots and the sound of a car crash." After calling the boss several times without a response, the lawyer quickly called the police. "The lawyer is a witness, and we have asked him to rush to the scene. He is on his way now." "Good." Roan nodded and began to check the body in the sports car. Because the head of the body was tilted to the left, Roan could not see the face of the body clearly, but Lassie on the opposite side could see it more clearly. After looking at the face of the dead, Lassie was surprised. "It's Zinderjais." Luo An was puzzled. "Do you know him?" "I'm more surprised that you don't know him." Hearing Luo An's words, Lassie was speechless, and then patiently explained the identity of the dead. Zinderjais, in his 30s, is the boss of a well-known Hollywood film company. He is a rich second generation and a billionaire. Since he successfully acquired the film company with the inherited funds, Zinderjais has been on the news. Because this guy's emotions are too profuse, he has scandals with some movie actresses every once in a while. This is Hollywood. It's normal. Luo An didn't feel anything about it. The other party was the boss of a film company, and it was normal for him to get involved with a female star. There is a saying that goes, at the end of Mulholland Drive in Hollywood is a bed. Lassie thought for a moment, walked to Roan, and whispered in his ear, also, this guy has a lot of criminal records. In the FBI's internal database, there are many cases where victims sued him for being too aggressive, but he used money to make such things disappear. This news surprised Roan a little. Sandajais is a billionaire, but he is not playing a game of mutual consent. Lassie did not see the surprise in Roan's eyes. She continued to whisper, if Sandajais really died because of a woman, then there are too many suspects in this case. How many? Hundreds? No, definitely more than 1,000. Chapter 328. The gunman is a woman. At the crime scene, next to the silver grey convertible sports car. Hearing that Sandajais had had sex with nearly 1,000 women before his death, Luo An fell silent. As expected of the Free and Democratic Federation, the lives of the rich are really boring and dull. Also, what do these rich people use to maintain themselves? Lassie, who was next to him, bowed her head and said nothing. She had seen Sandajais' gossip in the media. It was no exaggeration to say that the women he had dealt with were either good looking or good looking. Sandajais never treated himself badly in this regard. When she thought of there being nearly 1,000 such women, a feeling of envy and jealousy suddenly lingered in Lassie's heart. Roan coughed twice, patted Lassie's shoulder, then took out his cell phone and called Mona. Mona, how is the surveillance around here going? Sorry, I only found the scene when the murderer fired the gun. Mona on the other end of the phone tapped on the keyboard a few times, frowning and explaining. There was an intersection in front of the victim's sports car. The victim just slowed down at the time, and then he was shot in the chest. When the gunshot rang out, passers-by on the side of the road fled in all directions. There was no trace of the murderer in the surveillance, nor was there any footage of the murderer firing a gun. No trace of the murderer. Roan raised his eyebrows, leaned forward to look at the location where Sandajais was shot in the chest, used his experience as a killer to guess the general direction of the murderer's shooting, and then walked to the road next to him with his cell phone. Mona, where was the specific location when the victim was shot? Keep walking back. Mona tapped on the keyboard to turn the computer screen to the real-time surveillance footage of the crime scene, and remotely controlled Roan to walk to the exact location where Sandajais was shot while driving a sports car. That location is not far from the intersection, in the middle lane of the road. This location. Standing at the location where the victim was shot, Luo An squatted slightly, looked up at the trace of the bullet hole in Sandajais' chest, and then his face changed slightly. According to Mona's surveillance investigation, the murderer was not in the surveillance screen when he shot Sandajais, and most of the locations outside the surveillance screen are at least more than 200 meters away from the location where Sandajais was shot. After investigation just now, Luo An and Lassie determined that the bullet in Sandajais' chest was a 9mm pistol bullet. The effective range of an ordinary 9mm pistol is 50 meters. Although it is still lethal at a distance of 200 meters, it is a big problem whether the 9mm bullet can accurately hit the target due to the influence of gravity, wind speed, etc. when shooting at this distance. What's more, this is outdoors, there are many passers-by, and the scene is complicated. Various things have a great impact on the person who fired the gun. But even so, the murderer quickly pulled out a 9mm pistol and fired twice at a location 200 meters away. The two bullets perfectly hit Sandajais' chest, then put away the pistol and ran away quickly. He's a tough guy. Standing up, Roan glanced at several locations in the distance and smacked his tongue. It seemed that this gunman was not an ordinary person. Roan. LAPD has found a witness. At this moment, Lassie shouted to attract Roan's attention, and then came over with a black girl with dreadlocks. Hearing Lassie's words, Roan immediately returned to the silver grey sports car, briefly introduced himself, and asked, "What did you see when the gunshots rang out? Did you see the murderer's appearance?" "No." The black girl shook her head, indicating that she didn't see what the murderer looked like. At the time of the crime, she was tying her shoelaces across the street, and the gunshots, when the murderer fired, scared her so much that she sat down on the ground. The black girl said that she subconsciously looked towards the place where the gunshot came from, but she didn't see who fired the gun, nor did she see any men. There were only women running around in panic. No men, all women. Hearing what the black girl said, Luo An didn't say anything, and Lassie asked hurriedly, "Are you sure?" "Yeah." After confirming again and again that the black girl was not mistaken, Lassie turned to look at Luo An and spread her hands. "I didn't expect the murderer to be a woman." Luo An nodded with his chin on his hand, and added, "She is also a woman with extraordinary skills and excellent marksmanship." Noon, Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Sandajais, 39 years old this year, is the boss of a well-known Hollywood film company. That film company has made many movies in recent years and earned a lot of box office. Mona sat at her workstation and introduced the victim's information to others. Sandajais' father was an entrepreneur in the chemical industry. After his father's death, Sandajais chose to give up the traditional physical industry and began to move into the film media and other industries. Sandajai's personal financial situation is good, and the financial situation of the film company is also good. There are no problems with the funds for the time being. Luo An nodded, and just as he was about to speak, Lassie suddenly raised her interest and asked, "Does Sandajais have a son or daughter? If he dies, who will inherit his property?" Mona glanced at Lassie, tapped the keyboard a few times, and said, "Sandajais has no sons or daughters that the public doesn't know about, and he doesn't have a wife. Both his father and mother are dead. The only person who can legally inherit Sandajais' estate is Sandajais' cousin, who is currently attending college in another state and majoring in biology and ethics." Lassie stopped talking after hearing this. She wanted to investigate who was the biggest beneficiary of Sandajais' death, so that person might be the suspect of Sandajais' murder. But the probability of a girl who was far away from the other side of the Federation and had never seen Sandajais since she was born being suspected of killing Sandajais was too low. Lucky girl. Luo An did not comment on this girl who had the opportunity to become a billionaire. He asked, "How did you investigate those women who had relationships with Sandajais?" "Not very good." Hearing Luo An's words, Mona immediately showed a headache expression, tapped the keyboard a few times, pointed to the information inside and said, "Sandajais' personal secretary gave me a lot of information, including 622 women. In addition to these, the secretary said that Sandajais had relationships with many women she didn't know. She didn't know the names of those people, and even Sandajais himself didn't know, so I couldn't investigate at all." Looking at the photos of models, hosts, fitness coaches and other women in the computer, Lassie's eyes turned red, and she became more envious and jealous. "Go get Lassie a copy of Sandajais' recipes and prescriptions. I think she might be able to use them." Roan casually threw a pot to Lassie, selectively ignoring Lassie's dissatisfied look, and the sanitary bowl Mona threw to him, and continued, "Don't worry about these women for now. I remember Lassie said before that Sandajais had a lot of cases involving rapine, but they were all suppressed by money. Have you checked those women?" "I'll check it right away." Mona nodded, turned around and continued typing on the computer. At this moment, Michelle pushed open the door of the investigation team and walked in with a folder. "The trace examination department has completed the investigation of the crime scene and the preliminary autopsy of Sandajais. This is the brief report they issued." Chapter 329, Bloody Photos, Asking for Investigation Clues. "Thank you for your hard work." Roan took the folder handed over by Michelle and opened it. The judgment of the trace examination department was the same as Roan's previous judgment. The cause of Sandajai's death was indeed 9mm bullets in the chest. The trace examination department also conducted a ballistic test based on the 2 bullets and found that the gun used by the murderer was not in the FBI's internal database, nor in the gun sales files on the market. It was a black gun that appeared for the first time. However, the trace examination department has entered the data of this gun into the FBI's internal database. As long as the other party uses this gun again, they will have a chance to catch him. By the way, the trace examination department found this thing in the victim's chest clothes. Michelle took out a small transparent evidence bag from her pocket, which contained several bloody headshots. Roan took the photos and looked at them. As expected, the person inside was a very beautiful white girl. Lassie, who saw the face of the person in the photo clearly, grinned and said, "It's really a photo that fits Sandra Giles' personality." Roan heard this and handed the photo back to Michelle. "Log into the FBI internal database and check the identity of this girl." "No problem." Michelle took the photo and began to investigate. Mona, who had been busy for half a day, said at this time, "I've almost finished my investigation." "Great." Roan and Lassie immediately came to Mona. "What are the specific circumstances of those rape cases?" "There are 19 rape cases related to Sandra Giles that are recorded in the FBI and LAPD databases. As for those who were bribed by Sandra Giles to keep silent, I can't find them." Mona brought the details of these cases to the two of them and explained the names and identity information of these 19 victims. There is a common point in their narratives, that is, Sandra Giles forced their will by putting something in the wine. When she said this, the expression on Mona's face was extremely disdainful. She looked down on Sandra Giles' behavior. Another woman, Lassie, also had a look of contempt in her eyes. Luo An was a little confused and didn't quite understand why Sandra Giles did this. The narrations of these 19 women all said that they had been dating Sandra Giles for a period of time before they were hurt by each other. Sandra Giles would probably be able to achieve his goal without using anything. After all, few women can refuse the pursuit of a billionaire. In this case, why did Sandra Giles do this? A strange habit? I don't understand the world of rich people. Shaking his head and putting the matter behind him, Roan asked, "Among these 19 victims, have any of them worked in the federal army or law enforcement, or have they ever been involved in gun-related sports? I'll look for them." Mona continued to type on the keyboard, and Michelle on the other side raised her hand. "Deputy Team Leader Roan, I found out the identity of the girl in the photo." "Oh." Roan turned around immediately. "What is the specific situation of that girl?" "The girl's name is Lexi, and she is 23 years old." Michelle put the girl's information on the computer desktop and explained. "The information shows that she is from Arizona. She currently works in a high-end restaurant in Hollywood and goes to an acting class on weekends. She looks like a girl who is ready to make a career in Hollywood. A very motivated girl." Roan admired the girl's fighting spirit, but he was not optimistic about her future. Hollywood is a world-class film center. Every year, there are countless girls like Lexi who pursue fame, but only a few of them succeed. After all, Hollywood is the place in the world that is most thoroughly dominated by power and male power. It is impossible for women to get what they want simply by hard work without paying anything else. Hearing Roan's evaluation of Lexi, Michelle nodded and continued to add, "Sandra Giles' credit card shows that he had dinner with Lexi 30 minutes before he was killed." "Okay." Roan patted Lexi's arm and asked her to go to the equipment room to get something, then looked at Mona and asked, "How is your investigation going?" "I'm investigating the life experiences of the 19 victims one by one." Mona took a sip of coffee and said casually, "Give me another 5 minutes. Take your time to investigate, don't rush." Roan picked up Mona's coffee cup and refilled it, then left the special investigation team with Lexi. "Let's go and talk to the beautiful lady Lexi and see what she thinks of Sandra Giles, a guy who likes to bully women." A high-end restaurant in the Hollywood area of Los Angeles. Sandra is a gentleman. After learning the identities of Roan and Lassie and the purpose of their visit, Lexi, who was wearing waiter's clothes, but still couldn't hide her excellent figure and beautiful face, immediately gave Sandra Giles the highest evaluation. "He is the best man I have ever seen." X2 looking at this young girl with shining eyes, Roan and Lassie felt their teeth aching a little. Judging from his appearance alone, Sandra Giles was well dressed and had a tough face. He looked really handsome. But inside, after pondering for a while, Lassie briefly explained that Sandra Giles had been killed and his past experience of bullying women. What surprised Roan and Lassie was that Lexi's expression did not change at all when she heard the news. She was neither surprised nor had any other emotions. "I have seen the news of Sandra Giles' murder on the news." Lexi shrugged. "A billionaire was shot to death. How could the media in Los Angeles, who wanted to pay attention to it at all costs, let go of such news? Not long after Ron and Lexi arrived at the crime scene, the news hit the top of the Hollywood news media, and soon the whole of Los Angeles knew about it. Lexi nodded and chose to believe Lexi's first explanation, and then asked, "What about the news about Sandra Giles bullying women? Did you know about this?" "Of course I know." Lexi said that she had been in Hollywood for so long, and had some sources of information. She had known about Sandra Giles' experience of bullying women for a long time. However, Lexi didn't care about it, because Sandra Giles told her that those women made up such rumors to frame him in order to cheat money from him. Lassie grinned. "You believe what Sandra Giles said?" Lexi looked up. "Of course. He is a single billionaire. There must be women who want to get benefits from him." Lassie's forehead was full of black lines. "Then aren't you afraid that Sandra Giles' words are false, and he will attack you and bully you? So what?" Lexi spread her hands. "If he is sincere, I will have a chance to leave this restaurant in the future. If it is false, and he really bullies me, the worst that can happen is that I will sue him in court and make him pay me a sum of money. No matter what, I will not lose." Hearing Lexi's logical and clear words, Lassie was stunned, and Luo An, who had been silent, was also full of black lines. Sure enough, those who have been able to make it in Hollywood for so long and still do well are not simple characters. They thought the other party was simple before. Without further ado, Luo An asked directly, "You have had quite a lot of contact with Sandra just during this period. Is there anything wrong with him during this period? For example, nervousness, worry, etc." "Well, there is indeed one thing." Chapter 332 Suspects, Interrogation, Sudden Confession. In a famous restaurant in Hollywood. Hearing Ron's question, Lexi tilted her head and thought for a while, then said, "One afternoon a few days ago, Sandra and I were walking in the park, and suddenly a woman jumped out of nowhere and cursed Sandra, saying that she would find someone to kill him, and laughed at me for being a fool." At the end, Lexi's face was full of disdain. On the first day in Hollywood, Lexi was ready to pay something. Of course, success would be the best, but if she didn't succeed, she would just treat it as a dog bite. For those women who only care about sadness and anger after being bullied, and don't take advantage of themselves in time, Lexi despises them from the bottom of her heart. Lexi was speechless, silently feeling that Hollywood is indeed a place where talents are born in large numbers. Ron did not comment on Lexi's life philosophy. He valued the case in hand more. He wrote a few notes in the notebook, and continued to ask, "Do you know the woman's name?" "No." Lexi shook her head and added, "But Sandra's secretary may know, because Sandra called his secretary that day, and it was his secretary who brought people to deal with the woman." "Secretary? Which secretary?" "The one with red hair. It seems to be Sandra's secretary for life." Half an hour later, in Sandra Giles' villa, Christiana Celine. The door of the study was pushed open, and a middle-aged white woman walked in. She stretched out her hand, and looked at Ron and Lexi with an apologetic face and said, "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting for so long." "It's okay." Ron stretched out his hand and shook hands with the other party. He had previously wondered how Sandra could let go of the women around him with his personality and habits. What kind of woman dared to work beside him? Aren't they afraid that Sandra would be tempted by her beauty one day and add something to the wine? Now seeing Christiana's short and fat figure and plain face, Ron finally understood where the other party's confidence came from to work for Sandra. "Please take a seat, both of you." There was a large desk at the back of the study, and a smaller desk on the side. Christiana sat behind the small desk, poured 2 cups of coffee for Ron and Lassie, and explained, "I'm really sorry, Sandra left so suddenly, and we are now busy with his funeral." Ron took the coffee and nodded. After all, Sandra Giles was a billionaire, and he didn't have parents or children. How to distribute so much money and company stocks was indeed a big problem. However, Ron was too lazy to pay attention to these things. He briefly introduced the incident that Lexi mentioned, and then asked directly, "Do you know who that woman is?" "I know that woman has sent emails to Sandra to insult Sandra many times." Hearing Ron's question, Christiana suddenly realized, and immediately turned sideways. to tap on her computer while explaining with a wry smile, "But that woman doesn't know that I have always been responsible for Sandra's public email address. In fact, all the emails that the woman used to insult Sandra were sent to me." Lassie, who was sitting next to her, frowned slightly when she heard this. "As Sandra's secretary for life, you must be very aware of what Sandra has done. How could you? How could I turn a blind eye to those things and continue to work for Sandra with peace of mind, right?" Before Lassie finished speaking, Christiana interrupted her, then handed a printed piece of paper to Roan, looked at Lassie and explained, "It's very simple. This is Hollywood. I need to make money to support myself." Lassie was about to say something when she heard this, but Roan reached out to stop her, then pointed at the woman named Viola on the paper and asked, "What exactly happened between this Viola and Sandra?" Christiana didn't give much introduction, just said, "This lady went to Sandra's company and cursed Sandra, saying that Sandra bullied her against her will." Okay. Roan understood what Christiana meant, stood up and stretched out his hand to her. "Thank you for your cooperation. We may contact you during the follow-up investigation. Please make sure your communications are unobstructed." Christiana shook hands with Roan and smiled. "Of course, I will cooperate." The two left Sandra Gies's villa. Roan got in the SUV, took out his mobile phone and called Mona. "Mona, how is your investigation going? I found a suspect." Mona on the other end of the phone tapped the keyboard a few times, looked at the character information in the computer and said, "Among the 19 victims, there is a young woman named Alana who told her psychologist a week ago that she was going to find a killer to kill Sandra Gies." Roan raised his eyebrows. "Psychologist?" Lassie, who was sitting in the passenger seat, explained, "It should be the psychologist who determined that Alana had potential murderous tendencies, so he called the police." Click. Mona on the other end of the phone snapped her fingers. "Lassie is right. Good." Roan picked up the paper in his hand and told Mona the general information about Alvara, then said, "This lady had trouble with Sandra before. You can check her situation briefly." "Okay, give me 2 minutes." After hanging up the phone, Roan started the SUV and began to drive slowly towards the FBI Los Angeles branch building. The SUV had not gone far when Roan's phone rang again. Mona on the other end of the phone said in a serious tone, "Roan, this Alvara and Alana know each other. They used to work together in a company. The difference is that after Alana was bullied, she reported to the Special Victims Division of the LAPD. Alvara did not, and she was a victim not recorded in the archives." After listening to Mona's description, Lassie and the co-pilot concluded the two women knew each other and both said they wanted to find someone to kill Sandra. Finding a killer is not a cheap thing. It is a very cost-effective plan for each person to pay half the money. Roan nodded, threw the paper in his hand aside, and asked, "Mona, where do these two ladies live? You and Michelle should also go on an outing. We need to invite them to our special investigation team for a cup of coffee." 2 hours later, at 3:30 p.m., in the office area of the special investigation team, Alvara and Alana were already sitting in 2 interrogation rooms. Roan and Michelle pushed open the door and entered the interrogation room where Alvara was. Alvara, who was behind the table, was a young woman with obvious mixed race characteristics. She had a delicate face like a doll and a very good figure. Seeing Roan and Michelle enter the room, Alvara crossed her legs and sneered, "I don't want to lie to you. To be honest, I'm very happy that Sandra Gies is dead. Very happy." "Really?" Michelle turned on the computer and began to record the interrogation content. Roan sat down on the interrogation table, looked down at Alvara, and asked with a smile, "Do you think hiring a killer to solve the other party is a good way?" Alvara raised her head and said coldly, "Why not?" Roan smacked his lips and was about to speak when there was a knock on the door of the interrogation room. He left the interrogation table and opened the door and found that the person knocking on the door was Lassie. Without waiting for Roan to ask questions, Lassie glanced at Alvara in the interrogation room and then whispered in Roan's ear. Alana pleaded guilty. "Roan, if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331. Kill yourself with money. Lass's words made Roan stunned for a second. Then he walked out of the interrogation room and closed the door, standing in the corridor and asked, "What happened specifically?" "It's very simple." Lassie shrugged, saying that after Roan and Michelle entered Olvera's interrogation room, she and Mona also entered Alana's interrogation room. Lassie briefly exchanged a few words with Alana, and then Mona said that she checked Alana's bank account spending records, and there was a sum of $200,000 in cash that Alana took out from the bank, but there was no record of Alana using the money to spend. After hearing Mona's words, Alana, who had already completed her revenge and vented her anger, did not hesitate or beat around the bush, and directly said that she used the money to hire a killer to kill Sandra Gies. Alvaro was not involved. This was just Alana's personal act, and she paid for it herself. Luo An was very upset when he heard this, but he suddenly thought of a question. The information shows that Alana is just an ordinary person working in a company. Where did she get $200,000? Most ordinary people in the Federation have less than $100,000 in their lifetime savings. A huge sum of $200,000 is not something that Alana, who has only been working for a few years, can come up with. Hearing Roan's words, Lass's face looked a little strange. She didn't answer Roan immediately, but asked him a question. "Do you remember what Mona said before? Alana had called the police to the Special Victims Division of the LAPD and accused Sandra Gies." "I know." Roan nodded, but Sandra Gies used money to suppress this matter. At this point, Roan suddenly realized, "You mean, this money was taken out by Sandra Gies to make Alana give up the accusation and buy her to shut up?" "That's right," Lassie said with a wry smile. "Alana said that Sandra Gies spent a full $300,000 to buy her to shut up and give up this matter. Then Alana used $200,000 of it to hire a killer to buy Sandra Gies' life, and she still had $100,000 left." Roan grinned when he heard this, and he couldn't help but smile bitterly like Lassie. He never expected that Sandra Gies would die with his own money. Does this count as buying his own life with his own money? Roan and Lassie looked at each other, and both saw the look in each other's eyes that didn't know what to say. After a few seconds of hesitation, Roan pushed open the door of the interrogation room, asked Michelle to come out and rest for a few minutes, and then pushed open the door of the interrogation room where Alana was and walked in. Entering the interrogation room, Roan cast his eyes on Alana behind the interrogation table. The first feeling he had when he saw her was that she was big. Too big. Really too big. Not the kind of big that was cumbersome, nor the kind of big that was abrupt, but a kind of big that matched Alana's delicate face and excellent figure very perfectly. Although he despised Sandra Gies' character, Roan admitted that he had a good eye for choosing women. Suppressing his male physiological instinct, Roan pulled his eyes out of the abyss of Alana and then sat down next to Mona. Humph. Hearing Mona's cold snort in his ear, Roan had a blank expression on his face and decided to have a good fight with Mona tonight. After coughing twice, Roan looked at the interrogation record recorded by Mona, looked up at Alana, and asked directly, "You said you hired a killer to kill Sandra Gies. Where did you contact the killer? What did the killer look like?" "Sorry, I can't tell you." Alana glanced at Roan behind the interrogation table, leaned back, and said, "Don't you just want to know who hired someone to kill Sandra Gies? I admit that I did it. Hurry up and send me to court." Seeing Alana's attitude, which was completely different from before, Roan became interested. While thinking quickly, he asked with a smile, "Alana, if you continue to have this attitude, then when you go to court for trial later, in addition to hiring a killer to kill, you will be charged with not cooperating with the FBI and lying to FBI agents. You know, lying to FBI agents and deceiving FBI agents is a serious crime in federal law." Hearing Roan's words, Alana straightened up immediately, staring at Roan with wide eyes. "You." Seeing this, Luo An chuckled, crossed his legs, leaned back, and looked at the other person tactically. The two looked at each other for a moment, and finally Alana was the first to give in. "Sorry, I don't know." Luo An didn't say anything. Mona frowned and asked, "What do you mean by don't know?" "I just don't know." Alana pouted and said, suppose I found the other party on the internet and have been in contact with him by phone and have never met the killer. Then how do I know who the killer is and what the killer looks like? Mona opened her mouth and didn't know what to say next and subconsciously turned to look at Luo An. Luo An saw this and raised his mouth slightly and asked, how did you give the killer the $200,000? Alana thought for a while and said, he sent me a message and asked me to put the money in a trash can on a street in West Los Angeles. Okay. Luo An was not surprised by this answer, but felt that the killer's methods were a bit old-fashioned and nothing new. Luo An then asked, is this $200,000 the full amount of money the killer asked for, or is it a deposit? One type of killer who takes orders to make money is divided into two stages. First, he takes a deposit to kill someone. If he fails, the deposit will not be refunded. After he succeeds, he sends the target person's death scene to the employer, and the employer pays the balance to the killer after confirmation. Most killers in this situation are generally not very high ranking and their abilities can only be considered average. Another type of killer who takes orders to make money directly takes the full amount from the employer, notifies the employer that the target person is dead after killing the person, and then disappears. If the target person is not dead, then this type of killer will continue to attack the target person until he kills the target person. Most killers in this situation are not ordinary people. They are powerful, have strong professional methods, and have enough confidence in themselves. In addition to these two types, there are also some wild killers who ask for money in different ways, with different methods and strengths. Some make people feel that they are smart and terrifying, while others make people feel that they are just here to make fun of them. Of course it's all the money. Alana said that after the other party received the money, he asked her to wait for news at any time these days, and then today she saw the information about Sander Gi's death on the news. Luo An frowned and remained silent. Mona thought for a moment and asked, when did you throw the money into the trash can? Where is the exact location of the trash can? It was 5 nights ago. Alana carefully stated the street where the trash can was located and the location of the trash can. Mona's 10 fingers clattered on the computer for a while and found that the trash can was in a blind spot of the surveillance camera and it was impossible to see who had been there. The two asked Alana some simple questions again, then stood up and left the interrogation room. In the office area of the special investigation team, Mona talked about the situation of the trash can. Lassie thought for a moment, pointed at Alana's mobile phone, and asked, since the surveillance camera can't see anyone rummaging through the trash can, should we use this phone to contact the killer, and then try to find the other party's location and identity? Mona did not answer, but cast her eyes on Luo An, who was sitting quietly with a teacup next to him. Chapter 332, Luo An worth $80,000. Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Seeing Mona, Lassie and Michelle all turning their eyes to him, Luo An stopped thinking about the question in his mind, nodded and said, we can give it a try. Michelle was a little worried. Will this alert the other party? Will it disturb the other party? Mona picked up a data cable and plugged it into Alana's mobile phone, sat back in her chair, and said calmly, as long as the reason is sufficient, it is highly likely that the other party will not find anything unusual. But what reason do we use? Hiring a killer to kill someone is generally a one-time cooperation, and there are rarely long-term cooperation. Lassie next to her thought for a while, clapped her hands, and smiled. We can say that we want to kill another person and want to continue to cooperate with the other party once. Michelle did not deny this method, but this method has an unsolvable problem. Who do we let the other party kill? According to Alana, the killer first asked her for a basic information of the target person before deciding whether to accept the order. If Lassie wanted to deceive the other party, then before the other party agreed to cooperate, she must provide the other party with a basic information of the target person. That's easy. Mona, sitting on the chair, smiled easily. I can create a person who looks real in the FBI database. But there is a prerequisite for doing this. That is, this person must really exist in this world. I just gave him a fake identity, and that person must cooperate with us. Lassie and Michelle frowned slightly when they heard this, thinking about where to find such a person. Luo An, who had been thinking about the problem and didn't say much, suddenly said, "Let the killer kill me." Huh. Mona and the other two looked at Luo An in surprise, and Luo An grinned. "I have also thought of the reason. This time it is not Alana herself, but a married female friend of Alana. This female friend wants to kill her husband and defraud a high amount of insurance money from the insurance company." X3. Mona, Lassie and Michelle looked at each other and found that the reasons, character settings and backgrounds given by Luo An were reasonable, so they decided on this plan and started to get busy. Lassie was experienced in disguise. She picked up Alana's phone and began to contact the killer using Alana's previous speech habits and text messages. Under Mona's guidance, Michelle quickly forged a young and wealthy accountant identity for Roan in the FBI database. In the photo of the character, Michelle also lowered Roan's appearance a lot, to the point that even acquaintances could not recognize that the person in the photo was Roan. While Lassie was sending messages to the other party, Mona quickly typed on the keyboard, trying to locate the other party through the internet to find out the other party's true identity and place of residence. The killer on the other end of the phone replied to Lassie not long after, and the words were simple: "Your friend's contact information." Lassie saw this and immediately sent her own contact information to the other party. Soon, Lassie received a text message on her phone. Roan did not rush Lassie to reply, but cast his eyes on Mona next to him. Mona shook her head and mouthed the words, "Give me a little more time." Roan nodded. Lassie paused for a few seconds and began to discuss with the other party in the tone of a vicious woman. The other party received the identity information of Roan disguised by Michelle and sent a price a moment later. $80,000. Lassie's mouth twitched when she saw the price, and Roan's eyelids also trembled. But what Lassie didn't expect was that the other party never asked her why she wanted to kill Roan from beginning to end. After confirming that Lassie had no objection to the price, the other party directly said a location and asked Lassie to put the money in a trash can in that area 2 days later in the afternoon. Then no matter how much Lassie asked, the other party no longer answered her questions. "Shit," Lassie cursed in a low voice, while Roan's expression remained unchanged, and he looked at Mona calmly. "How is it? Did you find the other party?" "No." Mona's face looked a little ugly. The time was too short, and the other party used a disposable phone. "I only found the other party's approximate location in a certain area in southern Los Angeles." "It doesn't matter." Roan patted Mona's shoulder to comfort her briefly, then looked at Lassie and smiled. "It's our performance time later." "No problem." Lassie smiled slightly and raised her hand to make an okay gesture. In order to prevent the killer from coming to investigate Roan's situation tonight and finding abnormalities, less than 2 hours after contacting the killer, Mona and Michelle quickly arranged a house, company, car and other items for Roan, based on the forged information before. The only problem is that Roan's face is a little, very different from the face in the information. But this is not a problem for Roan. He went to the supermarket to buy some things, and then in the astonished eyes of Mona and Michelle, he turned himself into the man in the photo in the villa. Mona walked up and touched Roan's face and said in disbelief, "You can actually put on makeup? There is this course in the FBI Academy, and I did quite well in that course." Roan gave a reason that he had prepared long ago, and then pinched Mona's face in return, and said with a smile, "Lassie is going to be my wife for the next 2 days. You won't be angry, will you?" Mona rolled her eyes at Roan when she heard that. It was just work, and she didn't take it seriously at all. Not long after, Lassie, who had also finished putting on makeup, came out of the room. Her makeup and temperament were very gentle, but there was a lot of pride and ambition in her eyes. Papa, Roan, Mona and Michelle all applauded Lassie. "She is worthy of being a senior agent from the intelligence department." "Thank you." Lassie smiled with her hands covering her mouth and bent down to make a lady's salute to the three of them. Everything was ready. Lassie lived a housewife life at home. Mona and Michelle monitored the surroundings of the villa in the basement of the villa, and Roan began to go to and from work like an office worker. During this period, Luo An used up all his killer skills and checked more than once whether there were any stalkers around him, but he found no one. Luo An thought that in this case, either the other party's skills and techniques were far superior to his, or the other party did not follow him at all. 2 days later in the afternoon, Lassie left home with $80,000 in case funds and went to the place requested by the killer. Mona and Michelle drove far behind, ready to check who would take the money and then follow the other party. Luo An disguised himself as someone else and left the company without anyone noticing. He did not follow Lassie, nor did he plan to check who took the money. It goes without saying that the person who took the $80,000 was most likely not the killer himself. So Luo An began to use his killer ability to quietly check the places near the trash cans requested by the killer, those places that were suitable for hiding himself and observing the surrounding situation. According to the plan, Lassie threw the $80,000 in the fast food pocket into the trash can on the corner and left directly. Mona and Michelle got out of the car and disguised themselves as two passers-by to monitor the trash can from a distance. Not long after, a ragged homeless man walked to the trash can from a distance, looked around, picked up the fast food bag, and turned to walk away. Mona and Michelle looked at each other and immediately followed each other without making a sound. Before they took a few steps, Roan's voice rang out from the communicator beside their ears. Immediately arrest the homeless man and take back the money. I have caught the killers. Michelle did not hesitate to hear this and immediately ran up. Mona quickly followed and asked in doubt, killers. Chapter 333. A harmonious and loving couple. 3 minutes ago, when Lassie walked to the area where the trash can was with the money, Luo An arrived at the rooftop of a 6-story building southeast of the trash can. Before coming here, Luo An had quickly checked 3 places that met the previous requirements, that is, suitable for observing the area around the trash can, and suitable for hiding himself. This rooftop was the 4th location that Luo An judged. When he pushed open the door and walked to the rooftop, as soon as Luo An went out, he saw a man and a woman kissing passionately in each other's arms not far away. When the couple saw Luo An suddenly appear, they quickly let go of each other, and then the bald man wiped the lipstick on his mouth, smiled at Luo An, and prepared to pull the woman in the miniskirt away from here. Please wait a moment, both of you. I'm from the FBI. Luo An reached out his hand to stop the couple, showed the FBI's golden badge, and asked with a smile, I wonder if you saw any suspicious people when you came here? The bald man glanced at his girlfriend next to him and asked back with a puzzled look, what suspicious people? What do the people you are talking about look like? Hearing this, Luo An's smile became even more friendly. It's like you, killers with pistols hidden in their waists, armpits and thighs, and daggers hidden in their calves. As Luo An finished speaking, the bald man's face quickly turned cold, and he raised his foot and kicked Luo An in the abdomen at a high speed. The woman next to him in a miniskirt also had a cold face and quickly took out a pistol from her waist and prepared to aim at Luo An. Darn, Luo An reacted quickly, raised his left hand to catch the bald man's big foot, turned sideways and pulled forward to make him unstable, raised his foot and kicked the bald man's other knee, and at the same time, his right hand quickly took away the pistol from the bald man's waist. Bang, bang. The girl in the miniskirt was about to shoot, but Luo An immediately ducked his head to avoid it. The other party's 2 shots missed, and the bald man's fist hit Luo An's temple. Bang. Luo An pulled the trigger, and the bullet instantly flew into the bald man's thigh. He leaned back to avoid the other party's attack, and hid himself firmly in front of the bald man, making it impossible for the girl in the miniskirt to shoot. The bald man's expression did not change, for the gunshot wound on his thigh, as if he did not feel any pain at all. After his fist swung empty, he immediately reached into his armpit, ready to take out a pistol and kill Luo An. Luo An saw this and jumped up, grabbed the bald man's hand that was about to take the gun, and snatched the pistol before the other party stopped. He raised his right foot and kicked the bald man to the ground. The moment the bald man fell to the ground, Luo An was also exposed to the girl in the miniskirt. The girl in the miniskirt did not hesitate and immediately aimed at Luo An and pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. 3 bullets flew out of the muzzle, and the expression on the girl in the miniskirt changed from complacency to shock. Because the 3 bullets didn't hit Luo An at all, Luo An moved in front of her at a speed that she couldn't react to at all, and then grabbed the short-skirt girl's hand. Under the terrifying force, the short-skirt girl let go of the pistol uncontrollably in pain. Luo An kicked the pistol away at the moment it fell and pulled the short skirt girl's arm backwards and hid behind the short skirt girl. Fuke. The joints of her two arms were reversed and the short skirt girl was forced to be controlled by Luo An. While cursing loudly, she raised her head and hit Luo An with the back of her head. Bang. Then the back of the short skirt girl's head hit the pistol held by Luo An. Luo An was prepared. Son of. The short skirt girl was about to continue to curse Luo An in pain, but Luo An raised his pistol and aimed at the bald man opposite and laughed. Be civilized. Don't say dirty words, otherwise I will shoot your boyfriend. The short skirt girl was slightly stunned when she heard this and then cursed more happily and louder. Luo An was speechless upon seeing this. He looked at the bald man opposite him and asked, "What's going on? Are you having a conflict?" At this time, the bald man had stood up from the ground, ignoring the gunshot wound on his leg, and pointed his pistol at Luo An. Hearing Luo An's question, the bald man chuckled. "She is like this. She wishes I would die soon." Luo An nodded in sudden realization. What a harmonious and loving couple. Damn it, we are not a couple. The girl in short skirt heard this and struggled and twisted in Luo An's arms, very dissatisfied. "I have nothing to do with him. I just come to him to learn something." Luo An heard this and his eyes moved slightly when he looked at the bald man. It's actually a relationship between teacher and student. The bald man grinned, gave Luo An a you know look, and then said, "Mr. Agent, you let her go, and I'll let you go. Today, let's pretend that neither of us has seen each other, and we each go our separate ways. How about it?" At this time, Luo An's face was still made up, and the bald man and the girl in short skirt did not recognize who he was. Luo An did not answer, but glanced at the scene at the trash can in the distance, then turned on the communicator and said, "Immediately arrest the homeless man, and take back the money. I have caught the killers." Hearing this, the bald man and the short skirt woman looked at each other and immediately understood each other's eyes. The next second, the short skirt woman suddenly tilted her head to the side, revealing Luo An's head behind her. The bald man did not hesitate and directly aimed at the position where the short skirt woman's head had just been and pulled the trigger of the pistol. Bang, 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 bang. 5 gunshots rang out, and Luo An's head was still behind the short skirt woman, unharmed. The bald man looked at his body with a face full of astonishment. His left and right hands and left and right shoulders had been shot at this time. After looking at Luo An with a very complicated look, he fell backwards to the ground with powerlessness. Spencer. Seeing the bald man fall to the ground and fall into a pool of blood, the short skirt woman's face turned pale instantly. She shouted loudly, ignoring her joints being twisted, and struggled frantically to break free from Roan's control, and ran to the bald man. Seeing such a touching scene, Roan was also moved and quite touched. So he took out 2 handcuffs, handcuffed the short skirt woman's hands and legs together, searched all the weapons on her and the bald man, and finally allowed the short skirt woman and the bald man to lie in the pool of blood together. X2 Lassie, it's me, Roan. Selectively ignoring the short skirt woman's cursing and murderous eyes, Roan took out his mobile phone and called Lassie, "Call an ambulance to come to me as soon as possible." Okay. Not long after hanging up the phone, Lassie arrived here with the paramedics. Roan and Lassie left with the ambulance and were responsible for guarding the bald man. Mona and Michelle drove the short skirt woman back to the special investigation team. In the hospital, Luo An was bored and looked at the operating room, waiting for the operation to end. Lassie came over with a few bags of food. "Thank you." Luo An took the food and took a big bite. Lassie sat down next to him and asked, "How did you find out that these 2 people were not right?" "Because I found that they hid a lot of weapons." Luo An swallowed the food in his mouth, saying that the 2 people's means of hiding things were really ordinary. He just glanced at them and saw the weapons on them. Lassie was a little surprised. "Is it that simple?" "Of course, it's not that simple." Luo An took a deep breath and teased Lassie, then smiled and said, "Remember the surveillance that Mona checked when we went to the crime scene before? When I returned to the special investigation team, I took a close look at the people captured by the surveillance. The short skirt girl caught today is among those people." Lassie heard this and immediately gave Luo An a thumbs up with admiration. Just as he was about to speak, Luo An's cell phone suddenly rang. "I'm Mona." Mona's tone on the other end of the phone was a little strange. "Luo An, the identity of the woman we caught is questionable." Chapter 334 Stockholm Syndrome, Luo An's poisonous tongue. Special Investigation Team, Office Area. After the operation on the bald killer named Spencer, Roan took him back to the Special Investigation Team and locked him up in another interrogation room. In the office area, Roan sat down next to Mona and asked, "You said before that the woman in the miniskirt had a problem with her identity? What's the specific situation?" Lassie next to him also came over. She was also very curious about this matter. Mona tapped the keyboard a few times and said, "The FBI database shows that the girl's name is Lexa Rodell, and she is 18 years old this year." Hearing this, Roan couldn't hold it anymore. When they first met, the girl in the miniskirt had a lot of messy things on her face, and when she cried later, she turned into a little cat with black and white stripes on her face. Roan always thought she was at least 25 years old, and 30 years old was not impossible. "I have heard that white people tend to look old, but I didn't expect it to be so outrageous." Luo An sighed silently in his heart, and Mona continued, "In the FBI files, Lexa Rodell's father is a wealthy man in Las Vegas. 3 years ago, the wealthy man called the police and said that his 15-year-old daughter was missing, but the Las Vegas police never found her, nor did they find out how the wealthy daughter disappeared. Seeing that the police were unreliable, the wealthy man offered a reward of $2 million just to find his daughter. So, we caught a rich girl." After listening to this introduction, Lassie was surprised, but why would a rich girl become a killer? She was bored and looking for fun and had a conflict with her family, so she ran away from home in a fit of anger. She was dissatisfied with her father's control and took revenge on her father. Luo An picked up the tea and took a sip, casually mentioned several possibilities, and finally concluded, "It is also possible that she was simply kidnapped and finally contracted Stockholm Syndrome." The most famous example of Stockholm Syndrome is Patricia Hearst, the daughter of the Hearst family, a well-known wealthy family in the Federation. After she was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, she was beaten and tortured, and eventually joined the organization and robbed banks with them. She was then wanted by the police, arrested and imprisoned. Her sentence was gradually reduced, and she was finally pardoned by the president and successfully cleared of her charges, becoming a socialite again. Lassie, who also knew about this, shook her head speechlessly. Mona continued, "The specific reason for the disappearance of Lexa Rodell is still unclear, but I have contacted a psychologist from the FBI Special Victims Services Division, and the psychologist will come to our place to contact Lexa later." After Mona finished speaking, Michelle next to her handed a folder to Roan and said, "Mona and I just briefly interrogated Lexa Rodell. She said that she was not the murderer of Sandergeis, but she knew who the murderer was. Lexa said that she could tell the identity of the murderer. In exchange, we must release Spencer. She is not the murderer." Lassie frowned slightly when she heard this. Roan had guessed this a long time ago, because when he fought with the two on the roof before, he found that Lexa's skills and marksmanship were only average. However, in response to Lexa Rodell's bargaining, Roan threw the folder he had just read back on the table. It seems that the daughter of this tycoon is very likely to have Stockholm Syndrome. After pondering for a few seconds, Roan stood up from his chair and said, "Michelle, contact the wealthy tycoon and briefly explain his daughter's situation. Mona, you should cooperate with the psychologist later. Lassie, come with me to the interrogation room, where Mr. Spencer is, and we'll ask him how he feels about kidnapping a 15-year-old minor." "Okay, Deputy Team Leader Roan." "Okay." In the interrogation room, Spencer in a wheelchair had his arms tightly wrapped in bandages and his legs handcuffed. He looked very listless, no longer as high-spirited as he was on the rooftop. Roan sat across from Spencer's interrogation table, frowned, and said to Lassie behind him, "Turn off the light above his head, the light is a bit dazzling." "Oh." Lassie subconsciously glanced at Spencer's bald head that was somewhat reflective, pressed the switch, and silently turned off the light. Hearing Roan's words, and seeing Lassie's actions, Spencer's face twitched, and his breathing accelerated several points. "Good evening, Mr. Killer with thin hair." Seeing that Spencer was ready to face the interrogation in silence, Roan disagreed in his heart and launched a venomous attack. Can you tell us what the crime of bullying minors is under federal law? Also, how do those hungry guys in prison treat those who are convicted of bullying minors? Spencer was furious when he heard Roan's words, but he still didn't speak, just staring at the two people opposite him. Luo An was not in a hurry. He crossed his legs, picked up the teacup and drank slowly. He continued to chat with Spencer unilaterally, but he kept talking about the other party's bald head. Within 5 sentences, he would definitely contact Lexa Rodell. Spencer, sitting in a wheelchair, became more and more irritated, and his breathing became heavier. Finally, when Luo An despised him, a killer who has debuted for many years, with his apprentice, Can't Beat Me, an FBI, 2 against 1, Spencer finally couldn't stand it anymore. Son of, eat. It was obviously you who didn't follow martial ethics and hid your identity first. Spencer's face flushed, and he was about to explode. Since the bank robbery, the face and name of Luo An Greenwood, deputy head of the FBI Special Investigations Group, has become quite famous in the Los Angeles underground world. Many killers remember Luo An's face and choose to take a detour if they meet him in the future. Because these killers were not sure that they could break into the bank controlled by the robbers alone like Roan and kill them without any injury. Spencer was one of these killers. He did not think it was shameful to do so, because those who valued their reputation over their lives had already gone to hell. When he met Roan this afternoon, because Roan was wearing makeup, Spencer did not recognize his identity, so he chose to confront Roan head on. As a result, lying on the ground, seeing Lassie helping Roan remove his makeup, Spencer almost regretted it. After listening to Spencer's narration, Lassie opened her mouth slightly and looked at Roan in shock. She did not expect that Roan had such a big reputation in the underground world. Roan was also very surprised by this. He had never been to the underground world in Los Angeles, and he really didn't know about this. It seems that we need to prepare more vests in the future. Luo An was extremely alert in his heart, silently taking note of this matter, but his expression remained unchanged on the surface, and he continued, "Let's not waste any more time. Spencer, tell me who the murderer of Sandra Gies is. In return, I will not tell the judge that you just didn't cooperate with our request." Hearing this empty talk, Spencer's expression darkened, and he had a deeper understanding of Luo An's thick skin. However, now he is at the mercy of others. Spencer was silent for a long time, looked up and said, "I can tell you who the killer is, and I can also help you find her, or even catch her. But I also have a request. You give up suing Lexa." Chapter 335 The Real Killer, Kakabar. In response to Spencer's request, Lassie also learned Roan's sharp tongue. "I'm sorry, Mr. Spencer, it's not time to go to bed yet, so don't talk in your sleep." Spencer's eyes changed when he heard this, and just as he was about to continue speaking, Roan suddenly realized a problem and asked, "Spencer, when and where did you meet Lexa?" "A year ago, in a bar in Los Angeles." Spencer frowned slightly, not understanding why Roan asked this, but still answered his question seriously. "I went there to drink at the time, and Lexa was owed wages by the bar owner, so I helped her." Roan looked at Lassie when he heard this. It seems that there is another reason for Lexa Rodell's disappearance. Spencer didn't understand what Roan and Lassie meant, so he continued with a serious face. "Two agents. Since Lakosha came with me, she has never killed anyone. I really didn't lie to you about this." "Okay." Roan waved his hand to interrupt Spencer. "Lakosha Rodell had a wealthy father. If she really hadn't killed anyone, the other charges wouldn't be a problem for her." Spencer didn't know that Lakosha's father was a wealthy man. After getting Roan's affirmative answer, he stopped talking nonsense and directly told the killer's situation. "The female killer is called Jane. This is not her real name. No one knows what her real name is." Spencer introduced seriously. "This woman is about 40 years old this year. She acts alone. She should be from the military. Her killing methods are similar to those of the military. She likes to kill with one shot." Lassie began to record carefully in the notebook. Luo An asked, "How do you know that she was the one who killed people?" "Because on the day that Sandra just died, Lakosha was scouting the place and she saw that woman." Spencer said that after he took the order to kill Sandra Gis, He had been using him to train Lakosha scouting ability in those days. That day, Spencer was watching Lakosha scouting the place from a distance and suddenly heard gunshots and saw Sander just die. Lakosha saw the appearance of the killer in the chaos, turned around and told Spencer, and Spencer immediately recognized who the other party was. Luo An continued to ask, "Do you know why this Jane killed Sander Gies?" "No." Spencer shook his head. How could he know why the other party killed someone? I feel that Jane should have just accepted a mission to kill Sander Gies. This woman only has money in her eyes. Luo An took a sip of the teacup. It seems that this time he has to catch the killer first, and then investigate the mastermind behind the order. Lassie finished recording in the notebook, and looked up and asked, "Where does this Jane live?" "I don't know. The residence of the killer has always been a secret. Except for those who are particularly close to him. Others will not know it at all." Lassie frowned slightly when she heard this. "You don't know where she lives? Then you said you could help us find her?" Luo An beside her was not in a hurry at all, because every killer has his own method. As Roan expected, Spencer grinned and explained, "I really don't know where Jane lives, but I know where her favorite place is. When there is no mission, Jane spends most of her time having fun there." "Good." Roan put down the teacup and nodded with satisfaction. "Where is that place?" "The Caca Bar on 19th Street in West Los Angeles." Hearing the name of the bar, Lassie's pupils shrank. Seeing her expression change, Roan glanced at her and said nothing more and continued to ask Spencer questions. After a while, the interrogation ended and the two walked out of the room. After the door was closed, Luo An asked directly, "What happened just now?" "I know that Caca Bar." Lassie did not hide or hesitate and said directly, "It is the most hidden and the most content-rich lesbian bar in West Los Angeles. I often went there for fun some time ago." Luo An's mouth twitched when he heard it. He was silent for a few seconds and patted Lassie's shoulder. "Very good. This time, you will lead the operation to capture the killer Jane." Lassie nodded, thought about it, and asked, "I met a few friends in that bar. Should we try to find clues about Jane through them?" Luo An asked in a deep voice, "Are your friends reliable?" "Absolutely reliable." Lassie smiled and shook her fingers. "You have to trust me." Seeing this, Luo An covered his face helplessly. "Okay, you try it. No problem. Leave it to me." Lassie went away to make a phone call. Roan returned to the office and handed Mona the portrait of Jane that the portrait artist had drawn based on what Spencer said, asking her to try to find out Jane's real name and other useful information. Michelle came over and shook the phone in her hand. The psychologist of the Special Victims Department is in contact with Lexa Rodell. The atmosphere in the room is pretty good. In addition, Lexa Rodell's wealthy father has already taken a private plane from Las Vegas to us. He should be here soon. Hearing the word private plane, Roan's eyes lit up, and he pulled Michelle to the side and asked in a low voice, "What about the $2 million reward issued by the wealthy man to find his daughter?" Michelle was slightly stunned and then lowered her head embarrassedly. "Sorry, I forgot to ask." Looking at Michelle, who had an apology on her face but didn't know exactly what she did wrong, Roan sighed speechlessly. Or maybe he had been working for Roan for too short a time and hadn't learned the essence of the special investigation team's case handling. After coughing twice, Roan began to teach Michelle. Michelle's attitude was very correct. She nodded repeatedly and studied seriously. Good. Roan was very satisfied with Michelle's attitude. At this time, Mona raised her hand. "I found out the real identity of this Jane." Roan immediately walked to Mona. There was a photo of a young white woman with short hair in the computer. Jania Jones, a former CIA agent, was dismissed by the CIA due to a major mistake in an operation, and later became a professional killer. She has a family genetic problem in terms of mental health, which is not particularly stable. She needs to take certain specific drugs all year round. After listening to Mona's introduction, Roan looked at the line "extremely accurate shooting" and the other party's information, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. It seems that the real killer who killed Sander Gies is her, but I don't know who gave her this task. Lassie came over, shaking her phone, and said seriously, "My friend saw that Jane not long ago. She is now in a hotel not far from the Caca Bar." "Well done." Luo An nodded with satisfaction, and after a moment of hesitation, He said, Michelle, Mona, you stay with the special investigation team and guard the interrogation room. Lassie, contact the SWAT team, and we will go to the hotel to check the room together. Okay, Deputy Team Leader Luo An. No problem. 30 minutes later, the two SWAT teams blocked the front and back doors of the hotel. Luo An and Lassie took several other SWAT members and walked down the stairs to the floor where Jane was. Everyone slowly moved to the door of Jane's room. Lassie was about to use the room card to open the door, but Luo An suddenly stretched out his hand to stop him. Lassie looked puzzled, and just as she was about to raise her head, Luo An suddenly pushed Lassie to the ground with force. Bang, bang, bang. The next second, several bullets suddenly shot out from the room. Chapter 336 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Strength over Skills. On the 9th floor of the hotel, at the door of a room, the sudden bullet made Lassie's pupils shrink as she fell to the ground. Luo An glanced at Lassie to make sure she was not injured and immediately took the room card to open the door. Seeing this, the 4 SWAT team members behind the two did not hesitate and immediately hid behind the explosion-proof shield and rushed into the room with rifles. Don't move. Lie down. Put your hands up. There were 3 young girls without clothes in the room. When the SWAT team members entered the room and shouted loudly, they were panicked and immediately fell on the bed in front of the gun. On the other side, there was a rope hanging on the balcony of the room. Luo An behind the SWAT team members clearly saw that the moment they broke into the room, a figure jumped down from the balcony along the rope. Luo An walked to the balcony quickly, shook the rope briefly, and immediately pressed the communicator after confirming the length of the rope and ordered in a cold voice, seal off the 4th to 8th floors. Understood. All the SWAT members in the communicator responded in unison. Seeing Lassie walking to the balcony, Luo An said in a deep voice, take people to carefully check the elevator shaft in the hotel. Janea may choose to escape from there. Okay. Lassie accepted the order and nodded. Luo An put the Glock 18 back to his waist and jumped onto the protruding wall on the other side of the balcony rope. Then Luo An bent down, jumped out of the balcony wall with his lower body, grabbed the balcony with his fingers, and then suddenly let go of his hands in the shocked eyes of Lassie and several SWAT members. Luo An's action scared Lassie. She quickly stretched her head out of the balcony and then found with a look of surprise that Luo An had grabbed the wall of the balcony on the 8th floor with both hands and was hanging on that balcony. Fouquet. Seeing that Roan continued to let go and jumped to the balcony on the 7th floor, Lassie took a breath of cold air, secretly cursing Roan for not wanting to die, and turned around and took 2 SWAT team members to quickly leave the room. Notify the hotel to stop the elevator. Check the elevator shaft carefully. Outside the hotel, looking up, seeing Roan without any protective measures, just relying on his arms and hands to hold onto the balcony 1 floor at a time. Several SWAT members looked horrified, and their eyes changed. Bang, bang. Suddenly, just as Roan jumped to the balcony of the room on the 5th floor, 2 gunshots suddenly rang out from there. Several agents downstairs were shocked, and their hearts jumped to their throats. On the other side, in the room on the 5th floor, Jane's face was full of disbelief. She kept holding the gun to guard against the rope she left, ready to shoot the other person down quickly if someone jumped down along the rope. What Jane never expected was that Roan actually jumped down from the other side of the balcony with just his arms without any other preparations. However, the experienced Janea still quickly moved the muzzle and pulled the trigger, but in the second she was stunned, Roan's reaction speed was faster than her. With both hands, Roan grabbed and flipped into the balcony. He successfully dodged Janea's first bullet, and the second bullet slightly grazed his calf. A few drops of blood seeped onto his pants, but Roan didn't care. He raised his head slightly, grinned, and smiled at Janea, who was dressed coolly and had short brown hair. I found you. Roan thought his smile was very warm, but in Janea's eyes, it was definitely the most terrifying smile she had ever seen in her life. Especially when she saw Roan's face clearly, Janea's pupils shrank suddenly, and the hair on her body stood up instantly. She had seen Roan's facial portrait in the underground world of Los Angeles, and had heard about Roan's performance in the bank robbery. At that time, Janea only remembered the name and face of Roan Greenwood in her head, but didn't take it seriously. As a former CIA agent, Janea knew too well the operations of the federal government. She believed that drone's real ability should be only about 80% of what was reported in the news. But when one bullet missed and another bullet rubbed the edge, Janea, who was absolutely confident in her shooting skills, couldn't help but curse. What on earth are those insects in the federal government thinking? Why put such a terrifying guy in the FBI? Is he a waste of talent? Bang, bang, bang. She pulled the trigger of the pistol frantically towards Roan's position. At the same time, Janea turned around and ran out of the room quickly. She stepped on the ground with her right foot and turned her body to the left at a very fast speed to avoid the bullet. Roan stared at Janea's back with his eyes and pounced on her like a cheetah. Bang. At the moment when Roan grabbed Janea's neck with his right hand, Janea suddenly turned back, crossed her hands, and grabbed Roan's right hand, jumped onto Roan's shoulder, and hung on Roan like a snake and spun quickly, and finally threw Roan to the ground with force. Lying on the ground, with his head firmly clamped by Janea's long legs, Luo An was not panicked at all and asked, "Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? You've practiced well." Janea held Luo An's arms tightly with both hands and sneered, "Thank you for the compliment, but this is a physical technique that will send you to hell." "Really? But you should know a saying called 1 force defeats 10 skills." Luo An grinned, supported himself with his left hand, and suddenly stood up from the ground carrying Janea. While Janea was holding his right hand, Luo An, with a confused face, suddenly smashed her against the wall of the room. Bang. Under the terrifying force, an indescribable pain suddenly came from Janea's back. Janea's face was as hen. "You." Before she could finish her words, Luo An continued to swing his right arm and smashed it hard against the wall of the hotel. Bang, bang, bang. 3 muffled sounds of flesh hitting the wall echoed throughout the room. Janea's face turned from blue to grey, and a lot of blood flowed from the corners of her mouth. However, she still used up her last bit of strength to lock Luo An's head with her legs, and held Luo An's arms with both hands, and refused to let go. Seeing that Luo An was still preparing to slam himself against the wall, Janea's face changed, and she suddenly grabbed Luo An's right hand fingers, and prepared to bend them in the opposite direction. Feeling Janea's movements, Luo An's face suddenly darkened, so he suddenly changed direction and smashed his right hand that was hitting the wall to the ground. Bang. The tiles on the floor of the hotel room shattered instantly. Janea's face changed, and a mouthful of blood spurted out uncontrollably. But Janea still chose to handcuff Luo An with her body, and refused to let go. Luo An was in no mood to waste time with her. He raised his left hand to grab Janea's feet and suddenly bend them to the side. Snap. Ah, beads of sweat instantly appeared on Janea's head. Luo An then used his left hand to pry open his thigh, which had lost a lot of strength, and then threw Janea out of the room. Bang. The door of the room was instantly smashed from the inside out. Janea lay in the corridor, staring at Luo An, who was walking towards her with a stern face. She spurted out a mouthful of blood and finally fainted with unwillingness on her face. Several SWAT members who came here not far from the corridor were horrified when they saw this scene and swallowed their saliva together. "Hurry up and call an ambulance. She can't die. She is still useful." Luo An said a few words to the SWAT members, then bent down, searched Janea's body briefly, and found something like a phone card. "Okay, no problem." The SWAT team members nodded hurriedly and pressed the communicator. One of the team members saw that Luo An's calf was still bleeding and hurriedly said, "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, let's ask someone to bandage you." "Thank you, not for now." Luo An thanked him, then looked at the card in his hand and pressed the communicator, saying, "Mona, bring your laptop to the scene. We need your help here." Chapter 337, A Criminal's Paradise, The Killer's Truth About the Case. 2 hours later, the hotel scene was cleaned up, and Janea was taken to the hospital by ambulance with Lassie and 4 fully armed SWAT members. According to the doctor's judgment in the operating room, Janea's thoracic vertebrae, lumbar vertebrae, shoulder blades, ribs and foot bones were all broken and damaged to varying degrees. The doctor said that she would not be able to walk for a long time in the future, and even during the interrogation, Janea had to lie on the bed, otherwise there was a risk of bone fractures and puncturing internal organs. Looking at the doctor's certificate and report, Lassie and several SWAT members looked at each other and saw the speechlessness and shock in each other's eyes. From then on, Roan Greenwood became an urban legend among a small number of SWAT members in Los Angeles as the deputy head of the FBI investigation team. Roan just smiled slightly at the admiring eyes of the SWAT members. He didn't care about the extent of Janae's injuries, as long as she didn't die. Luo An's attention was now focused on the card that Mona was holding, which looked like a phone card. What is this? It should be a credential. In the SUV, Mona studied the card carefully for a moment, then took out a card reader from the back seat and inserted the card. Credentials? Luo An was slightly stunned when he heard the word and thought of Janae's identity as a killer and raised his eyebrows. Could it be the login credentials of a killer website? After the card reader was inserted into the computer, a page with blue sky and white clouds, which looked very beautiful, suddenly popped up. Mona's 10 fingers flew on the keyboard, and after a moment, she shook her head helplessly. Sorry, Luo An, the protection of this website is very high. It is best to log in with a password. If you brute force it, I'm worried that it will cause too much loss. Okay. Luo An nodded and did not let Mona brute force it. Anyway, Janae was in their hands. Not long after, Luo An's cell phone rang. It's me, Lassie. Lassie on the other end of the phone glanced at Janae, who was tied to the bed with her teeth clenched, and said in a strange tone, Janae has finished the operation. She wants to see you, and said that there are some things she wants to talk to you alone. Luo An? Mona? Hearing Lassie's words, Luo An was a little confused, and Mona narrowed her eyes slightly. Although Janae is a killer, she looks good and has excellent temperament. Her 40-year-old age also provides her with a special charm. Mona didn't think Luo An would have anything to do with Janae, but she was still very wary of Janae. Don't ask. If you ask, she's a woman. Okay, I'll be there soon. Luo An looked at Mona in the passenger seat with a smile, hung up the phone, started the SUV, and headed in the direction of the hospital. 20 minutes later, Luo An and Mona walked into Janae's ward together. Good evening, Miss Killer. Luo An handed the midnight snacks he bought on the way to several SWAT members in the corridor and Lassie in the ward, then looked at Janae and smiled. How is it? How many bones are broken? Janae glared at Luo An fiercely and wanted to take a deep breath to calm herself down, but when she took a deep breath, she smelled the food in Lassie's hands, and she became even more angry. After a long silence, Janae finally calmed down, so she whispered, Greenwood, I have something to talk to you alone. Please ask other irrelevant people to leave the room. Sorry, there are no irrelevant people here. In the room, there were only Mona and Lassie besides himself. Luo An decisively waved his hand to reject Janae's request. If you have something to say, just say it directly. If not, I will go back to rest first. I have been busy all day today, and I just had a fight with you. I'm very tired. You. Janae's eyes widened immediately, and Luo An didn't care, just looked at each other quietly. Time passed minute by minute, and finally Janae lowered her head and whispered a string of numbers and letters. 3F7069S4. After saying this, Janae whispered, you should have my pass. This is my account name and the password is kept secret for the time being. I know the true identity of one of the founders of this website, and I can tell you who he is. My request is simple. You must help me reduce my sentence as much as possible, and you cannot send me to prisons like Angola Prison. Angola Prison is one of the most terrifying prisons in the Federation. The prison administrator claims that no one can get out alive, and only after death can the body leave the prison. Luo An did not immediately agree to Janae's request, but asked, what's this website about? A paradise for criminals. Janae sneered and explained, human trafficking, arms smuggling, hiring killers, gambling transactions, live broadcasts of murders, and other criminal acts you can think of, all of them are here. Lassie and Mona's faces sank when they heard this, but Luo An's expression remained unchanged. Isn't this the magical dark web that was passed down in later generations? However, the one in Janae's hand is more hidden and mysterious. Not only does it require a physical card pass for each person to enter the website, but if the pass is lost, Janae said that this person will never be able to enter the website in this life. Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly, So, the killing of Sandagis was the task you took on this website? Sandagis. Janea was slightly stunned. You arrested me because of him? No, how did you know that I killed him? Janea always paid great attention to details. She was 100% sure that when she did it, there was absolutely no surveillance camera that saw her, and no other cameras in the nearby area. You don't have to worry about that. Luo An did not tell her the reason behind it, and asked again, what exactly happened to Sandagis' murder? At this point, Janea had nothing to hide, and said directly, her daughter placed the order. X2 hearing this, Lassie subconsciously turned her gaze to Mona. Mona was also stunned for a moment, then shook her head repeatedly. No, Sandagis has no daughter. Halfway through, Mona suddenly remembered something, and Luo An's eyes moved slightly. Illegitimate daughter? Yeah. Janea nodded, saying that half a month ago, a young girl found her in the Kaka bar, and took out a sum of money, to beg her to kill Sandagis. Janea asked briefly, and learned that the girl had had a relationship with Sandagis not long ago, but found out that she was pregnant after being abandoned. The pregnancy was discovered by the girl's mother. After asking who the father of the child was, the girl's mother collapsed and committed suicide because she took $200,000 20 years ago to withdraw the accusation of sexual harassment against Sandagis. The girl who had depended on her mother for many years was about to collapse mentally after learning the truth. After selling everything, she took the money and found Janea. Janea agreed to take on this task. The girl did not wait for the news of Sandagis' death and jumped off the building and committed suicide. After Janea finished talking about this, she sneered, as a killer, I have to do my job after I get paid. This is my basic quality. X2 Mona and Lassie had different expressions on their faces, not knowing what to say. Luo An felt that the reason why Janea killed Sandagis was probably not just for money, but also because of a lot of personal emotions. Shaking his head, Luo An then simply asked about the girl's name and identity information, and asked Mona to verify the truth of this matter, and then prepared to ask Janea about the website again. At this moment, Luo An's cell phone suddenly rang. Deputy Team Leader Luo An, it's me, Michelle. Michelle on the other end of the phone whispered, Lexa Rodell's wealthy father has come to our special investigation team, and he wants to see you. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338 Bail, Old Money, The Truth of the Case. The next day, at 9 in the morning, in the meeting room of the Special Investigation Team, the wealthy father of Lexa Rodell was an elderly white man sitting in a wheelchair, followed by two middle-aged secretaries, a man and a woman. His name was Pranay Odell. Roan was not particularly good at distinguishing the age of white people, and it was even harder to tell the age of black people, but the wrinkles on the face of the elderly white man in front of him were too many, and Roan felt that the other party was at least over 70 years old. Sure enough, Michelle handed him a brief profile of the other party. Roan looked down and found that the other party was 86 years old this year. Lexa Rodell is 18 years old this year, and her father is 86 years old. After a simple calculation of Lexa's age when she appeared, Roan was secretly shocked. The life of rich people is indeed extraordinary. Throwing aside the messy thoughts in his mind, Roan stood up, stretched out his hand and shook hands with Pranay Odell. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Rodell. Hello, Team Leader Greenwood. You are really a young and promising young man. Pranay Odell smiled in his wheelchair and praised Roan several times. Mr. Rodell, thank you for your compliment. Roan smiled and exchanged a few pleasantries with the other party, then brought the conversation to the point. I wonder if Mr. Rodell asked to see me. Is there anything I can help you with? Bob. Pranay Odell did not answer Roan's question immediately, but called the male secretary behind him, who immediately took out a document from his briefcase and handed it to Roan. Roan glanced at Pranay Odell, slowly opened the document, and found a certificate from a large Los Angeles foundation that donated a sum of money to their special investigation team. Pranay Odell smiled and said, thank you very much, Team Leader Greenwood, for helping me find my daughter who likes to throw tantrums. These are my small thanks. Looking at the $1 million in the donation certificate, Luo An was immediately alert to the old fox in front of him, but he still smiled. It is our FBI's duty to protect the lives and safety of federal taxpayers. Mr. Odell is really too polite. The two secretaries, a man and a woman behind the wheelchair, immediately cast a strange look at Luo An, as if they didn't expect Luo An to say such words. When Pranay Odell heard this, he cast an admiring look at Luo An. It was not because Luo An's words made him happy, but he didn't expect Luo An to be so thick-skinned at such a young age. It was really rare. Pranay Odell believed that when he was Luo An's age, he was not as thick-skinned as Luo An. Seeing Luo An's ordinary handsome face and his experience of becoming the deputy team leader of the FBI investigation team at the age of 25, Pranay Odell subconsciously wanted to recruit Luo An. In a flash, Pranay Odell thought of something else and gave up the idea. After chatting with Roan for a while, Pranay Odell finally stopped talking nonsense and stated his request. Team Leader Greenwood, I hope to bring Lexa home today. The psychologist had almost finished talking to Lexa Odell last night. She was just doing some sneaky things. During her contact with Spencer, she was just learning the technique of killing. It was not the time for actual practice, and she had no lives on her hands. Stealing and sneaking were just a matter of paying a bail, which was really not worth mentioning to Pranay Odell. However, during the previous arrest, Lexa Odell had shot herself, and this matter could not be let go. Roan raised his eyebrows and was about to speak when the female secretary behind the wheelchair suddenly took out a folder from her briefcase and handed it to Roan. After looking at Pranay Odell thoughtfully, Roan took the folder and opened it. Inside was a certificate of ownership of a well-known federal company's stock. The total value of these stocks is $4 million, and the name of the stock owner is Roan Greenwood. But Roan is very sure that he has never bought this stock. Seeing that Roan's expression did not change, Pranay Odell nodded secretly in his heart and admired Roan's calmness, and then asked with a smile, Team Leader Greenwood, I bid $4.916 million to buy this stock from you. What do you think? No problem. Hearing Pranay Odell's words, Roan agreed without hesitation. This money is obviously the money to buy Roan to put down Lexa Odell and shoot him. The extra $900,000 is a tax that Roan needs to pay for selling stocks. The other party even calculated how much tax to pay for Roan and planned to pay it for him. And doing so is very in line with the provisions of federal law. Roan looked at Pranay Odell with a slight move. The old ginger is still spicy. This group of federal old money is really extraordinary. Seeing Roan nod his head in agreement, Pranay Odell smiled, stretched out his hand to Roan and said, when Team Leader Greenwood comes to Las Vegas for a tour, you can call Bob. The Odell family will provide all necessary support to our friends in the family, and will definitely let Team Leader Greenwood experience the beauty and happiness of Las Vegas. Roan stretched out his hand and shook hands with the other party, also smiling slightly. Then I'll trouble you when I have a chance in the future. No. The atmosphere in the conference room was very warm. Roan chatted with Pranay Odell again for a while, and then asked Michelle to take the lawyer brought by Pranay Odell to go downstairs to handle the parole procedures for Lexa Odell. At 2:30 p.m. that day, all the parole procedures related to Lexa Odell were completed, and Pranay Odell, with a dozen bodyguards, escorted his daughter out of the FBI Los Angeles branch building. TSK. Looking at the huge convoy downstairs, Luo An shook the $4 million after tax he got from selling stocks, and said with a sound of TSK. A total of 5 bullets, 800,000 each. Just then, Lassie came over. She didn't hear Luo An's words clearly, and asked in confusion, what did you say? Nothing. Luo An shook his head, and turned to ask, why are you looking for me? Mona has found out the information of the girl mentioned by Janaya, and she asked you to go over and take a look. Okay. Luo An immediately walked to Mona after hearing this. How is it? Is what Janaya said true or false? Unfortunately, it is true. Mona looked at the character information in the computer and sighed with a complicated expression. The pregnant girl was named Channa. Her mother worked in Sandra Gi's home 20 years ago. Her job was to deal with the hygiene of the villa room. Sandra Gi's was 19 years old at the time. After the girl's mother accused Sandra Gi's of sexual harassment, Sandra Gi's father bought her to shut up with $200,000. Dana was born when Sandra Gis was 20 years old. In order to ensure that everything was foolproof, Mona asked the trace examination department to handle Dana's body. According to the comparison, she and Sandra Gis were indeed father and daughter. The child in Dana's belly was also closely related to Sandra Gis genes. X3. After reading this information, Lassie, Michelle and Mona looked grim, and Luo An frowned slightly. An ethical tragedy. The air in the office area was quiet for a while. After a while, Luo An interrupted the somewhat solidified air. How is the website we found from Janya? Mona was shocked when she heard the words, and immediately tapped the keyboard. I have a big discovery. Chapter 339. Clues to the library theft case. Work report. Federal laws have always been heavily negotiating. If law enforcement officers want to get specific clues about a case, they must reach a certain agreement with the criminals within a reasonable range. On the contrary, if the criminals want to reduce their charges and sentences, they must tell law enforcement officers useful clues that they don't know yet. Janaea is a former CIA agent and a killer in the underground world. She knows too many things and secrets, so Luo An and his team didn't waste any time and quickly reached an agreement with her. After the agreement was reached, Michelle was responsible for recording the secrets narrated by Janaea, including the truth of many murders or other cases. Mona got the login password of the website from Janaea, successfully entered the website, and then, it was an eye-opener. As soon as Luo An sat down next to Mona, he saw a post about human trafficking. A young girl named Nicole. Her hands were tied to an iron pole, naked, standing next to a masked man, with an auction message attached below. Female, 18 years old, no disease, starting at $200,000, free shipping to Europe. There weren't many posts like this. Mona checked and found that the website had been established not long ago, and the audit was strict, so the number of members on the website was not particularly large, just over 15,000. But the types of crimes on the website and the areas involved were too many and too wide. Pornographic transactions in Bangladesh, telecommunications fraud in Gayaozibi, human trafficking in Southeast Asia, arms smuggling in the oil region, unique product transactions in the Golden Triangle and Silver Triangle, and other scattered crime live broadcasts. Luo An shook his head helplessly. It was only 2005. There weren't many such websites, and these things were just the tip of the iceberg for the underground criminal world. After a long pause, Luo An asked, Mona, you just said that you have a big discovery. What is it exactly? The clues to the theft case in Los Angeles library a few days ago. Mona looked grim and moved her eyes away from a bloody post on the website. After a few keystrokes, a green post showing completed appeared in front of Luo An. The content of this post was very simple. I urgently need some original books from the Los Angeles Central Library. If someone can take them out of the library, I'm willing to buy them at a high price. Please send a private message to discuss the specific price. Luo An glanced at the name of the owner of this post and asked, Mona, how is the investigation of the theft case #1 investigation team going? Mona was slightly stunned. She really didn't know about this. I know. At this moment, Lassie next to her suddenly raised her hand and smiled. They found 2 suspects. Yesterday, they took our FBI's small plane to other states in the Federation to arrest people. The FBI in major cities in the Federation has some private planes, but these private planes are not big. In addition to the pilot, the cabin can only accommodate 6 people at most, and it is very crowded. Luo An doesn't like it. Okay. Luo An nodded, thought about it, and did not immediately share this clue with the #1 investigation team. Instead, he asked Mona to simply organize the clues about this website and prepare to find the team leader pot and burn later. Dealing with cases like criminal websites requires a lot of manpower and funds, and it takes a long time. It requires frequent communication with other departments and even other countries. It is completely unsuitable for Luo An's special investigation team of 4 people. Instead of taking the lead and wasting effort, it is better to throw the case directly to the higher-ups and let them worry about it. Mona and Michelle began to organize the relevant content and documents. Luo An picked up the teacup and took a sip. He found that Lassie was sitting in front of the computer, staring at the photo of the girl who committed suicide. Shanna. Roan patted Lassie's arm and asked, "Hey, what's wrong with you? I just feel a little sorry for her." Lassie rolled her eyes at Roan, then sighed, pointing to the information in the computer and explained, "The data from the LAPD shows that when the paramedics arrived, Dana was not completely dead, and the baby in her belly had a chance to survive, but Dana refused the help of the paramedics. In addition to resentment towards Sandajais and emotional breakdown, Dana did this to ensure and force Jana to take action." Roan pondered, narrowed his eyes and said, "Jana said before that Dana only gave her $30,000. Normally, Jana would never accept a task with such a small amount of money. But Dana used suicide to arouse the resentment of Jana, who is also a woman, so even if Dana died, Jana completed the task. Maybe." Lassie shrugged. Sandajais, Dana, and Dana's mother, all three parties involved are dead. What they were thinking at the time, perhaps only God knows. Lassie took a sip of coffee with a complicated look. "It's just that the girl who is far away on the other side of the Federation has a good deal. All of Sandajais' billions of assets are hers. If Dana finds Sandajais and explains her identity, then this matter may go in another way. But there are no ice in this world." Luo An took the folder that Michelle had sorted out and handed to him, and then said, "Also, have you forgotten the ICE group? The Federation has a special tax called inheritance tax. The tax rate of this tax is determined according to the total amount of inheritance. The tax rate table contains 12 tax rate brackets, with the lowest being 18% and the highest being 40%. Sandajais is a billionaire, and his inheritance tax rate must be the highest. So the lucky girl must first pay a huge sum of money before she can inherit everything from Sandajais. This is not an easy thing. In the previous life, there was a woman who became a stepdaughter for a long time in order to inherit her father's billions of assets. Only through this profession did she quickly earn the money she should pay for inheritance tax. When Roan first learned about this, he was very moved. It turned out that everyone is destined to succeed. If they are not given a push, they will never know how great their potential is. In addition, this woman is ruthless. Soon, Mona also got the clues and content of the website. Roan took the documents that Michelle and she had sorted out and went to the office of the team leader Potent Burn. "Good afternoon, sir." "Good afternoon, sit down." Potent Burn took the documents handed over by Roan, glanced at them casually, and then his eyes suddenly froze. "This is a paradise for a group of criminals to revel." Roan briefly described the content of the Sandajais murder case and the situation of Jana, a former CIA agent and current professional killer. Finally, he said that his special investigation team was small and powerless and could not handle such a large criminal website, so he came to add burden to the boss. He came to ask the boss for help. Looking at Roan speechlessly, Potent Bind didn't say much, just put the file aside. "I will contact the FBI Interpol to handle this case later." Roan grinned and pretended not to see Potent Bind's eyes. The two chatted briefly for a while, and Potent Bind suddenly changed the topic to the Washington headquarters. "Roan, the Washington headquarters has begun to summarize the cases handled by your special investigation team during this period." Roan's eyebrows moved slightly when he heard this and asked with a smile, "What does the chief mean?" Potent Bind looked at Roan deeply and then handed him a black folder. Chapter 340, Conversation in the Supervisor's Office. Chat in the Investigation Team's Office. FBI Los Angeles Branch Building. Team Supervisor's Office. Taking the folder handed over by Potent Burn, there was a notice order. It required Roan to arrive at the FBI Washington headquarters on Monday in half a month to accept the headquarters evaluation and inspection. Roan's eyes moved slightly, and Potent Burn crossed his legs and asked calmly, "Roan, do you still remember why the Washington headquarters set up your 10 special investigation teams in major cities in the Federation?" "Of course." Roan closed the folder and nodded. In 2005, the internal structure of the frontline case handling personnel of the FBI was still somewhat complicated and redundant, and the cooperation with other law enforcement agencies was not very smooth, and there were frequent incidents of mutual hindrance. The 10 special investigation teams of Roan and others were essentially a pilot program made by the Washington headquarters. The group of people in the Washington headquarters wanted to study whether the streamlining plan could be carried out smoothly, and where help and improvement were needed through the specific performance of these 10 special investigation teams. After recalling these things in his mind, Roan's mouth twitched, as if he had overlooked some small problems. Under his leadership, the special investigation team successfully solved several cases of varying sizes, which made a good reputation for the special investigation team and himself. However, the cooperation between their special investigation team and other federal law enforcement agencies, except for the LAPD, seems to be not very much. Most of the time, Roan asked Mona to go directly to those departments to find information, and the number of exchanges with those departments was very small. Seeing the embarrassed expression on Roan's face, Potent Burn was also speechless, and didn't know what to say. Roan had politely rejected Potent Burn's recruitment before. Potent Burn has never suppressed Roan, or made any small moves, to make things difficult for Roan and his special investigation team. On the one hand, it was because of the existence of Verinus, and on the other hand, it was because Potent Burn was sure that Roan was a very outstanding talent, and he admired Roan very much. Roan's performance in the previous few cases, the senior officials of the FBI Los Angeles branch all praised Roan Greenwood, the deputy head of the special investigation team, for his extraordinary skills, quick mind, wit and courage. Moreover, his words and deeds make both superiors and subordinates feel comfortable, and he knows the rules of politics very well. From any level, Roan Greenwood is very good. But there are two fundamental reasons for the establishment of the special investigation team. Roan is very good at handling cases, which is indisputable. In terms of cooperation and communication with other federal law enforcement agencies, the group of people in the Washington headquarters are used to sitting in the office, and when problems arise, it is their traditional skill for superiors to blame their subordinates. If Roan wants to take this opportunity to go to Washington, to become the head of the special investigation team, it will probably not be easy. There are still 2 weeks before the trip to Washington. Potent Burn put down his legs, crossed his hands, and looked at Roan, and said earnestly, during this period, the special investigation team should handle more suitable cases. Okay, thank you, sir. Roan understood what Potent Burn meant, and nodded with a smile. Then he suddenly thought of something, pointed to the folder he had just brought to Potent Burn, and said with a smile, "Sir, I suddenly remembered that our special investigation team has some other information on this website where criminals gather. When the agents from other departments handle this case, let us help them deal with some simple problems. There is an opportunity to cooperate with other federal law enforcement departments in front of him, and he can't give it up in vain, let alone waste it." Seeing the difference in Roan's attitude towards criminal websites before and after, Potent Burn was full of black lines, but he didn't say much, and nodded and agreed. Leaving the team leader's office, Roan looked at the black folder in his hand, thought about it, took out his mobile phone, and decided to call the long-legged supporter in the distance. On the one hand, he had finished handling another case, and had a chat with Verines to keep in touch. On the other hand, he was seeking off-site assistance to see if Verines could get him a copy of the situation and information of the other 9 special investigation teams. The reason why Washington called them this time was that, since it was a judgment and inspection, Luo An and the other 9 heads of the special investigation team must be rivals, and they might even compete with each other. In this case, it is necessary to find out the details of the opponent first. Knowing yourself and knowing your enemy will ensure victory in all battles. This is the wisdom of thousands of years. The phone was quickly picked up. This is Verines. Good afternoon, sir. I'm Luo An. Luo An smiled, exchanged a few simple pleasantries, and began to narrate his experiences during this period. On the other side, the special investigation team, office area. The preliminary arrest work of the Hollywood tycoon shooting case has been resolved, and the next step is to deal with the later case procedures and other work. Mona has 2 folders, Lassie has 2 folders, and Michelle has 12 folders. The 3 women are sitting at their desks and busy. Mona and Lassie's work content is not particularly urgent. The 2 of them poured some coffee for Michelle and took some snacks. The 3 women chatted while handling their work. Mona picked up a potato chip and stuffed it into her mouth. Lassie, how is your beautiful landlord now? In the previous case of the death of a teenager, Lassie's beautiful landlord was at a loss for a while after learning about her sister's situation. She did not even go to interviews sent to her by some Hollywood film companies. She has temporarily left Hollywood and returned home to rest. Lassie spread her hands and sighed. The house is temporarily in my custody. I live alone in such a big house now, but I don't go back to live there very often. Mona knew Lassie's living habits very well, and Michelle, who had just joined the special investigation team, had also heard about it. After typing a line of text, Michelle shook his hands, picked up the coffee, and drank it all, tilted his head and asked, Mona, has Roan ever asked us whether we will have a holiday after this case is over? No. Mona shook her head and asked with a smile, why, do you want to spend a few days at home reading books again? Yes. Thinking of her experience during this period of time, since she came to the special investigation team, Michelle was very emotional. While Michelle was grateful and admired for Roan Greenwood, the deputy team leader, she prayed in her heart that the top management would not parachute a team leader here, and it would be best if Roan was promoted directly to team leader. The 3 women then talked about the case they were handling, and then for some reason the topic became more and more off topic, and finally they started talking about other investigation teams and LAPD, and the embarrassing and strange things they encountered during the case. At this time, Roan came back and saw the 3 women laughing so hard that they fell backwards and asked in confusion, what are you talking about? A somewhat strange case. Lassie heard this and explained with a smile. Some time ago, LAPD caught a kidnapper, and this guy kidnapped 19 people. But this kidnapper neither hurt these people nor threatened them for money, but forced them to play Monopoly with him for 48 hours. 6. Roan was speechless. The Federation is vast and has all kinds of talents. He always thought that there were more people with strange brain circuits in a certain state in the southern part of the Federation, but he didn't expect that there were actually quite a few in Los Angeles. Clapping his hands to attract the attention of the 3 people, Luo An handed the documents in his hand to them. Everyone, this is what we got after handling this case. Chapter 341, Inventory of Harvest, Michelle's Attitude, Dinner. Hearing Roan's words, Mona's lips slightly raised, and Lassie's eyes immediately lit up as she opened the folder. Michelle's personality was more reserved, but she opened the folder much faster than before. The content of the folder was exactly the $1 million that a foundation under the father of the wealthy man from Las Vegas, Pranay Odell, gave to the special investigation team. The special investigation team currently has a total of 4 people, and Roan also received a huge amount of additional funds, so the $1 million was divided equally among the 4 people, $250,000 each. I love you so much, Luo An. Seeing the number 250,000, Lassie immediately jumped up on the spot, grabbed Luo An's arm, and said with a red face, Luo An, what do you want to eat for dinner today? I'll go buy it now. After saying this, Lassie glanced at Mona, who was immersed in the folder with her head down and her face slightly red, and then whispered in Luo An's ear, when I was investigating the case of the Hollywood tycoon being shot, I got the diet of Sandagize you mentioned from the red-haired personal secretary. I will secretly write it down for you later. Luo An's eyebrows immediately raised when he heard it. Who are you looking down on? I'm a person with a strong body, a system and medicine. Why do I need those things? After glaring at Lassie fiercely, Luo An coughed lightly and whispered, remember to put it in the drawer on the far left of my desk. Luo An didn't mean anything else. He was just a little curious about the eating habits of billionaires. He wanted to gain some knowledge and learn something new. Mona, who knew Roan's strengths and weaknesses, as well as Lassie's personality and preferences, ignored the two people who were whispering together, but took out the calculator in the computer and began to seriously calculate how much she had gained during this period. This time it's $250,000 and there is also that overseas account, special case handling funds, monthly salary and bonus. Mona's eyes became brighter and brighter, and she began to indulge in the addition and subtraction of numbers. Michelle, who had just joined the special investigation team not long ago, but had assets of more than $300,000, was breathing rapidly, her pupils constricted, and her face was full of shock. On the one hand, she was shocked by the speed at which the special investigation team made money, and on the other hand, she was very shocked by Roan's generosity to his subordinates. When she worked in the supervision office before, she was used to seeing some leaders taking 8, 9, or even 10 layers of money and only giving their subordinates a bowl to taste. What's more, they didn't even leave the bowl. Pluck the feathers of the passing geese. They didn't pluck the feathers at all, they just kept the geese. Compared with those insects, Roan began to shine in Michelle's eyes. Golden light. Michelle made up her mind silently and decided to work for the special investigation team to the end. Roan's position in her heart rose several steps, just a little lower than the books that Michelle collected. Roan didn't know what Michelle was thinking, but the emotional perception in his mind told him that Michelle's attitude towards him had begun to develop in the direction of Lassie's attitude towards him. In Roan's emotional perception, Mona's attitude towards him was almost a burning fire, and Lassie's attitude towards him was almost equivalent to a lit torch. When Michelle first joined the special investigation team, her attitude towards Roan was mostly respect and admiration. After this period of cooperation and communication, Michelle's flame was small, but it had been ignited. This is also the reason why Roan chose to split the money equally. Although he can't reach the point of I have no interest in money, he doesn't particularly lack this thank you money. Everyone in the world is for profit. Roan does like money, but he values his teammates' thoughts and attitudes towards him more. A teammate who doesn't drop the chain, doesn't stab in the back, and even sticks with him at a critical moment, is much more important than this money. After laughing and joking with Lassie for a while, Luo An thought for a moment, looked at Michelle, and said, "Let's go out for dinner tonight, just as a welcome for Michelle to our special investigation team." Michelle hurriedly stood up after hearing this. Deputy Team Leader Luo An, it's settled. Luo An waved his hand, without giving Michelle time to speak, and pulled Mona, who was still immersed in the arithmetic game, over and asked with a smile, before Michelle came, what was the name of the restaurant the three of us went to? I remember you left their phone numbers, so send them a message to reserve a seat quickly, otherwise it will be too late to grab it. I know. Without waiting for Mona to speak, Lassie raised her hand and came over. Leave it to me. I have the phone number of the female manager of that restaurant. Luo An, when did you get this? Seeing the three people getting together and making a lot of noise, Michelle, who was used to being alone, was even more moved, and her eyes were slightly red. Seeing that the torch belonging to Michelle in emotional perception was getting hotter and hotter, the corners of Luo An's mouth slightly raised. At 8:30 p.m., at the Catch SX restaurant on the west coast of Los Angeles. Because they had plenty of time today and were excited, Mona and Lassie dressed up simply. A set of casual clothes highlighted Mona's excellent figure, and Lassie, who had a neutral style, was very heroic. What surprised the three was that Michelle also put on a simple light makeup. The golden glasses on the bridge of her nose, coupled with the special temperament cultivated by years of reading, made Michelle more eye-catching than usual. At least Lassie had already run up with a smile and took Michelle's arm. Luo An was a little surprised by Michelle's change. After making sure that the three of them had not left anything behind, Luo An took them to the location of the restaurant. Along the way, Luo An was accompanied by Mona with a proud figure on his left, Lassie with a heroic spirit on his right, and Michelle, who was well educated, and the four of them were extremely eye-catching. In addition to Luo An's handsome face and special temperament, many passers-by who had never seen Luo An's face suspected that this was another rich boy who came out to play games. Passers-by kept looking back, and several journalists took a few photos. In the restaurant, Roan sat at the main seat, Mona sat on his left, Lassie sat opposite Roan, and Michelle sat opposite Mona. This is a seafood restaurant, and it takes a long time to serve the dishes. Lassie disappeared with the restaurant manager not long after she sat down, and Michelle went to the bathroom not long after. Not long after Michelle left, Mona came to Roan and snorted in a low voice, "How about it? The three of us are with you tonight. Do you feel good?" Roan rolled his eyes when he heard this, as if he had done something. He had no interest in Michelle, who was older than him and had an average figure. He was even less interested in Lassie, a guy who only liked women. But Roan knew why Mona said this. It was just a woman's temper and jealousy. Without arguing with Mona, Roan gently pulled Mona's little hand under the table, leaned over and kissed her lips gently, and soon coaxed Mona into a happy mood with words. After a while, Michelle came back, and Roan and Mona let go of each other. When the waiter started serving the dishes, Lassie also sat back in her chair with the lipstick on her collar and a bottle of red wine given by the restaurant. X3 The three people at the table rolled their eyes. Roan swallowed the food in his mouth and looked at Lassie, who was wolfing down the food as if she had been hungry for decades. He said helplessly, "Lassie, after finishing this meal, you won't have the second half, right?" Chapter 342 Lassie, this table is free. Catch SX restaurant on the west coast of Los Angeles. At a square table deep in the restaurant, Roan, Mona and Michelle were enjoying their food at a leisurely pace. Lassie, on the other hand, was like a starving ghost, stuffing food into her mouth like crazy. Roan ordered 2 double-set meals tonight. Before all the dishes were served, Lassie took a napkin and wiped her mouth. "I'm done." Roan swallowed the food in his mouth and prepared to speak. Lassie took the wine glass and drank it all, smiling slightly and said, "By the way, if you are not full later, you can continue. There is an event in the restaurant today, and the bill for our table has been waived." Seeing Lassie with her hands on her hips and a proud look on her face, Michelle, who felt Lassie's power for the first time, didn't know what to say. Mona rolled her eyes and continued to eat. Roan was speechless, then raised his hand and called the waiter. "Hello, give me 2 more of the seafood barbecue set on the menu." X2 Seeing the waiter turn around and leave, Mona rolled her eyes at Roan. Michelle looked around and still didn't know what to say, so she had to lower her head and continue to enjoy the food. Lassie's mouth twitched when she saw Luo An's action, but she was not panicked. She had agreed before that she would take care of Luo An's dinner tonight, so she would not break her promise. It was just 2 more sets of meals. Lassie tilted her head and looked at the beautiful restaurant manager not far from the hall. Seeing that she was looking at her, Lassie raised her eyebrows and turned to Luo An and the other 2 and said, "I'll leave first. Call me if you have anything." After saying that, without waiting for the 3 to answer, Lassie stood up and walked away from the chair quickly. Not long after, the figure of the female manager wandering in the hall also disappeared. After Lassie left, Michelle became more silent. Luo An saw this while eating and chatting with her. "Michelle, the last time I went to your house, I saw a lot of notes on your desk. Are those notes your thoughts or comments when you read books?" "Only a small part of them are my thoughts." Michelle swallowed the crab meat in her mouth and explained, "In fact, most of those notes are what I wrote down when I found interesting in the book. The content is very diverse, with everything." "Can you give an example?" "Of course. Do you know who Napoleon's favorite woman was?" Talking about books, Michelle gradually talked more. During this period, Roan and Mona also discovered that Michelle is basically a human-shaped database. Michelle is most interested in the stories that have happened in the world, and she also likes to find out the reasons behind the stories, the thoughts of the characters in the stories, or the origins of the items, so she knows a lot of strange, unconventional, and unpopular knowledge. As she was talking, seeing that Roan and Mona were looking at her with burning eyes, Michelle's voice gradually became quieter. "Is there something wrong with me?" "No." Lassie shook her head repeatedly. "We are just a little surprised." Roan nodded in agreement with Mona. He had seen that Michelle was definitely a highly intelligent person, and she knew the relationship between trade-offs. She had her own hobbies, reading, and life goals, reading 1 million books before she died, and building her own library, and she also understood the importance of money in the process of achieving her goals, so she would suppress her dissatisfaction in her heart, go out to work and make money, and use the money she earned to enrich her hobbies. Taking the red wine that Lassie brought, Roan poured it into the glasses of the 3 people on the table, then smiled and said, "Michelle, although you are a little late, welcome to join the special investigation team. Here you will have the opportunity to achieve your life goals." Michelle smiled and picked up the glass and clinked it with Roan and Mona. "Thank you, I believe it. Cheers. Cheers." The new seafood barbecue set meal was served on the table not long after. Mona and Michelle, who had a small appetite, simply tasted a little, and the rest was stuffed into Roan's stomach, attracting many people's attention. Because Lassie didn't know where she ran off to, Roan and Mona drove Michelle back to her rental house before returning to their home. Opening the door of the rental house, Mona kicked her high heels aside and asked as she walked, "Roan, you ate too much tonight. Do you want something to help digestion?" Roan closed the door, walked quickly behind Mona, carried her on his shoulders, and walked towards the bedroom, grinning. "Food is too slow to digest. Exercise is more helpful for digestion." "Hey, my bedroom is not cleaned yet." "Then don't go to the bedroom. The living room is also good. You." In the next week, the special investigation team did not take on any new cases and was dealing with the Hollywood rich man shooting case and the situation of the criminal website. The rich man case was not complicated. The 2 killers were imprisoned awaiting trial. Michelle, Lacey and Mona wrote case reports and records. Roan sat in the team leader's office and reviewed the case funds of their special investigation team. Guns and ammunition, as well as the occasional repair costs of 2 SUVs, are the bulk of the case funds, and other expenses are not much. Unlike other investigation teams, there are also informant fees, undercover fees, and public property loss compensation funds every month. After calculating the expenditure of the special investigation team last month and writing a report, Luo An, who had nothing to do, crossed his legs on the table, took out his mobile phone, and started playing the cube game. There were many mobile games in the Federation in 2005, including puzzle and fighting games, but Luo An was not interested in them. He liked simple games like cubes that did not require much brain power. Dung. 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 At this time, Mona knocked on the office door a few times and walked in. Luo An did not even raise his head. "Did you have lunch?" "No, I had a midnight snack." Seeing that the sun had not come out for a long time outside the window, Mona handed the folder to Luo An speechlessly. "A document from New York, sent to me by the team leader Verines, requiring me to keep it confidential and give it to you separately." "A document sent by Verines?" Hearing Mona's words, Luo An immediately put his legs on the table, threw his mobile phone aside, took the folder, and began to check it carefully. Just as Luo An thought, the content in the folder was the basic information of the other 9 special investigation teams that he had asked Verines for help and asked her to find, including their personnel composition, team leader identity, work experience, cases handled during this period and the process of handling cases, etc. It is not particularly detailed, but the general framework is all there. Mona took a few glances at the documents while receiving them just now. Seeing that Luo An's expression was very serious, she immediately asked in a deep voice, "Luo An, is there any particularly big case that requires us to cooperate with other special investigation teams to complete it?" "What? No." Luo An was stunned at first, and then shook his head to explain what the team leader Potent Burn said before, that he needed to go to the Washington headquarters on Monday next week. Mona's eyes gradually brightened when she heard Luo An's explanation. "Do you have the opportunity to be promoted to the leader of our special investigation team when you go to Washington this time?" "Maybe." Luo An replied casually, with Verines and Mr. Clement there. He was not in a hurry. At this moment, the door of the team leader's office was knocked again, and Lassie stuck her head in. "Luo An, someone is looking for you." Chapter 343 Library Theft Case, Meeting. Special Investigation Team, Office Area. The person who came to see Roan was Lewis, the leader of the #1 investigation team in charge of the library theft case. Lewis was a middle-aged white man who looked very amiable. Ron and Lewis had a good relationship because they were the former leader of the number 2 investigation team, Owen, and they had a drink together after get off work. Seeing Ron walking out of the team leader's office, Lewis laughed out loud, walked over quickly, and gave Ron a big hug. "Ron, thank you so much this time." Ron, who didn't like being hugged by a man, grinned and pushed Lewis away, pulled him into the team leader's office, and asked with a smile, "Why, has the library case been solved?" "Almost." Sitting on the chair opposite Ron, Lewis smiled and briefly described the case. After receiving the Los Angeles library theft case, Lewis began to lead his men to carefully investigate clues. After a few days, he finally found a suspicious car that had left Los Angeles. After confirming the identity of the driver and the other party's suspicion, Lewis took his men to other states to carry out the arrest, but encountered considerable trouble. The suspect's resistance was just a small matter. The key was that after Lewis and his men successfully arrested several suspects, they did not find the stolen books and key evidence. Thanks to the website found by your special investigation team, Lewis looked at Luo An with a red face. If they had not known about this website, the agents of their number 1 investigation team would not care about the small card that was deliberately hidden by the suspect boss in a pile of discarded mobile phones, wires, computers and other parts, and they would not have obtained the key evidence of the suspect boss's theft. After saying these things, Lewis also took out a small box of tea from the east and placed it on Luo An's desk to express his gratitude. "You're so polite." Luo An took the tea leaves and smiled, then asked, "Have you found the guy who ordered this group of suspects to steal books from the Los Angeles library?" "Not yet." Lewis shook his head. According to the plan discussed in advance, after the group of suspects stole the books, they directly put the books in a hole under a stone on a highway in southern Los Angeles. They didn't know who was behind the order, but we have found the lost books under that stone. Lewis smiled and said calmly, "The mastermind behind the order can be slowly investigated, and he will be found eventually. Have you found the stolen books?" Luo An tilted his head in confusion, not quite understanding why the guy who placed the order paid, but didn't take the books. Did he encounter something unexpected? Or did he find out about the investigation of the number 1 investigation team? Luo An, who was confused, simply stopped thinking about it. Anyway, the books were found, the thieves were caught, and the follow-up was also handled by the number 1 investigation team. He didn't need to waste his thoughts on the magical brain circuits of the person behind the scenes. After agreeing with Lewis to go for a drink after get off work today, Luo An chatted with him for a while. Lewis, who still had a lot of work to do, got up and left Luo An's office. Biko Silver Needle sitting on the chair, Luo An looked at the English letters on the small tea box with a puzzled look on his face. He opened the small box and saw the shape of the tea leaves inside. Then he suddenly realized, it's actually Biko Silver Needle. Putting away the tea leaves for the time being, Luo An got up and walked out of the office. He looked at Mona, Lassie and Michelle and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, I will go to the Washington headquarters on Monday next week. It is expected to take a few days. Our special investigation team will have a temporary holiday during those days. Does anyone want to go to Washington for a tour?" Mona's eyes lit up and nodded repeatedly when she heard the words. She wanted to be the first to know the news of Luo An's regularization. Michelle, who only wanted to read in her free time, shook her head and refused. Lassie raised her hand and asked with a smile, "If we travel to Washington, will the expenses be reimbursed?" Luo An grinned. 0.1% can be reimbursed. TSK. Lassie shrugged and lost interest in traveling instantly. She originally wanted to see the customs of those female government workers in Washington, D.C. Since Luo An would not reimburse, there was no need to go. The girls in Los Angeles were more enthusiastic. By the way, Deputy Team Leader Luo An. At this moment, Michelle handed a few pieces of paper to Luo An and said, "These are the inside stories of several murders that the killer Jania confessed to in order to reduce her sentence. 2 of the cases have been unsolved cases in 2 other states of the Federation. Look. Wow, a serial murder case that killed 6 people, and an arson case that destroyed a building." Luo An took the papers and raised his eyebrows. He briefly read the inside stories of the cases, thought for a while, returned the papers to Michelle, and said, "You contact the FBI in those states and briefly explain the case to them. By the way, don't forget what I taught you a few days ago." Before the operation to arrest the killer Jania, Luo An had carefully taught Michelle the essence of their special investigation team's case handling. "You can eat anything, but you can't suffer losses. If you want to take something from me, you must leave something behind." Michelle looked a little embarrassed when she heard this. It was the first time for her to take on such a task, but she agreed after a short hesitation. "No problem, Deputy Team Leader Luo An. I will do this task well." "Good." Luo An nodded with satisfaction, and then patted Lassie on the shoulder. "If Michelle encounters difficulties, help her more." "Okay." Lassie smiled, bargaining for benefits. She liked it the most. There was also the matter of the killer website. Team Leader Potent Burn had already started to contact other departments within the FBI. As the primary discoverer of the clues, Luo An had to attend the case discussion meetings many times. That afternoon, another complicated meeting ended. After everyone left, Luo An, who was sitting in the chair with a sore body, walked out of the meeting room with a speechless face and stretched vigorously. Joint operations are the same, no matter where they are. The first thing to discuss in the meeting is not what the clues are and what to do next, but how to divide the pot and how to get the benefits. Fortunately, the special investigation team is only responsible for investigating information, not for taking the lead in handling cases. Thinking of the noisy scene in the meeting, Luo An shook his head repeatedly. For a moment, he suddenly didn't want to become a regular employee. "If I become a regular employee, I'll see if I can get a smart deputy team leader to attend this kind of meeting for me." Walking towards the special investigation team with random thoughts in his mind, Luo An turned a corner and a voice suddenly called him. "Luo An, wait a minute." Luo An hurriedly stopped and looked back. It turned out to be the team leader Potent Burn. At this time, Potent Burn's face was not very good either, obviously because of the bargaining behavior of the shameless guys in the meeting just now. "Good afternoon, sir." Luo An smiled. Anyway, his special investigation team was not the main person in charge of the case, so it was not his turn to have a headache. "Yes." Potent Burn hurriedly walked to Roan, handed him a folder, and said, "It's a small case. Your special investigation team doesn't have any cases on hand, so just deal with this one first." Thinking that there were still 7 days before he went to Washington, Roan opened the folder and found that it was a missing person case. Roan, the missing person case is a small case. Chapter 344, the disappearance of a 6-year-old girl from her home in the Villa area. Special investigation team, office area. Pushing open the door to the office area, Roan shook the folder in his hand. "Everyone, Team Leader Potent Burn has sent us a new gift." "Wow." Mona expressed her surprise expressionlessly. Michelle did not speak. Lassie put down the coffee cup in her hand, looked up and asked, "What kind of gift is it?" "The kind that parents all over the world are most afraid of." Roan handed the folder to Mona. "A few hours ago, a 6-year-old girl disappeared at home." Lassie frowned upon hearing this. It doesn't look like a human trafficker. Human traffickers rarely go to other people's homes to steal children. It may be kidnapping and extortion. Roan patted Michelle's arm, indicating that she and Mona should stay in the office to check the surveillance near the place where the child disappeared, as well as the information about the missing child's parents. "Lassie, come with me to the scene." "No problem." East Los Angeles, a villa area. A white bold sheriff led Roan and Lassie into the villa, saying as they walked, "The intruder broke into this villa 3 hours ago, around 2:20 p.m. A very cozy villa, but a very scary story." Roan scanned the layout and decoration of the villa and asked, "Where did the intruder get in?" "The back door." The bold sheriff led the two to the back door of the villa. At this time, the glass of the back door near the door handle was broken. It is not difficult to see that the way the intruder entered the villa was to break the glass and reach in to open the back door. "Okay." Roan walked forward to carefully observe the broken glass. Lassie thought for a while and asked, "Does this villa have an alarm system?" "Indeed, but unfortunately, it didn't work." The bold sheriff took Lassie to the second floor of the villa. At the entrance of the second floor stairs, Lassie saw the body of a fat white woman. Samira Lee, 45 years old, is the family's full-time nanny, and has worked for the family for 8 years. Perhaps due to negligence or other reasons, the villa's alarm system was not turned on. Lassie bent down and looked at the body of a woman with a bullet hole on her forehead on the floor, her face not looking very good. So, the intruder entered the villa from the back door, went upstairs with a gun, shot the nanny to death, and then took the child away. Yeah. The bold sheriff nodded, took Lassie into the little girl's small room, pointed to a toy clock in the corner and said, "This is a monitor." At the time of the incident, the child's mother was out shopping. During the break, the child's mother wanted to see her daughter, but found that her daughter was not in the room. She called the nanny but no one answered. The child's mother immediately called the neighbor for help because of worry, and then the neighbor called the police. One will leave a psychological shadow on people. Seeing the pink bedroom full of childishness and warmth, Lassie frowned and pointed to the monitor. "Does this thing have video recording?" The bold sheriff spread his hands helplessly and said, "No, it's just real-time monitoring, no video recording." This is really bad news. On the other side, downstairs in the villa, Roan waved his hand and called a detective from the trace inspection department. "Check if there is any blood or other traces on these glasses. Also, check the door handles to see if there are any fingerprints of the intruder." The detective from the trace inspection department nodded repeatedly. "Okay, no problem. Thank you for your hard work." Leaving the back door and walking towards the villa's living room, a female LAPD was sitting on the sofa, whispering to comfort a middle-aged white woman with long burgundy hair who was sobbing softly. This woman was the mother of the missing little girl, Madeline Allen. Seeing Roan coming, the female LAPD smiled at him and then left the villa's living room. Seeing Roan's FBI identity, Madeline immediately leaned forward and grabbed Roan's arm, her face full of excitement, and said, "How is it? Did you find my daughter? Did you find any clues?" "Oh, God. I'm sorry about your daughter, but please believe me, Ms. Allen, we will do our best to help find your daughter." After whispering to comfort Madeline Allen, she sat back on the sofa. Seeing Lassie coming and taking out a small notebook, Roan began to ask, "Ms. Allen, we didn't see any men's daily necessities in the villa. Are you and your daughter the only ones living in this villa? Where is the child's father?" "I divorced him and broke up peacefully." Madeline Allen wiped her tears and explained, "He works in another state in the Federation and has a new girlfriend. I just called him and he is on his way back by plane." Roan's expression remained unchanged and continued to ask, "Have you had a fight over the child recently? Is it possible that he—" "No, absolutely impossible." Madeline Allen shook her head repeatedly. "We have always had a good relationship. The divorce was just due to work issues. We are still good friends now. And John is a good man. He is very good to Kara and Samira. He would never do such a thing." John is the name of her ex-husband, and Kara is the name of Madeline Allen's missing daughter. Lassie next to her was silent for a few seconds and asked, "Have you had conflicts with anyone recently? Can you think of who would steal your daughter?" "I have been working in a securities company. There are only some minor conflicts between my colleagues at work, which will never rise to the level of family members." As she spoke, Madeline Allen became excited again. "Oh, God, I really didn't expect this to happen to me." Lassie saw this and quickly took out a piece of toilet paper and whispered to comfort the other party. After Madeline Allen's emotions gradually stabilized, Roan said, "In order to find you, Kara, as soon as possible, we need a copy of her DNA, so we need to take away some of her toothbrush, comb, hair, etc. By the way, we also need to monitor your mobile phone and your home phone. If the other party calls you to extort money, no problem, no problem, anything is fine." Madeline Allen nodded repeatedly. "As long as you can find my daughter, you can do anything." "Okay." Lassie continued to comfort Madeline Allen's emotions. Roan greeted the agents from the trace examination department and asked them to install monitoring equipment. When everyone started to get busy, Roan walked to the corner, took out his cell phone and called Mona. "How is it, Mona? How are you checking the surveillance in the nearby areas?" "Unfortunately, there are no clues." Michelle in the office area shook her head and said, "No suspicious vehicles were found in the surveillance." "Michelle, you continue to check the list of sexual offenders in the nearby area." Roan's face remained unchanged. "Where are Kara's parents? Is there anything unusual in their information?" Kara's mother, Madeline Allen, is the manager of a securities company in Los Angeles. Kara's father, John Rodriguez, is a partner in a chemical company in Ohio. Both of them are in good financial conditions, and there is nothing wrong with the call records. A very wealthy couple. Roan glanced at the time and found that 4 hours had passed since Kara disappeared. After thinking about it, he said, "Let's monitor Madeline Allen's mobile phones and telephones first. If the robbers are after money, we must get the news as soon as possible." No problem. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345. Poisonous Insects. Fingerprints of the Third Person. 3 hours later, in the Special Investigation Team's office area. Roan, the inspection report of the bullet that killed the nanny Samira at the crime scene is out. Lassie pushed open the door and walked into the office area, throwing the folder aside and saying helplessly, "It is the most common 9mm bullet on the market, but there is no matching result in the FBI system. This is a new gun." "Very good, a useless clue has been ruled out." Roan handed Lassie a cup of coffee, turned to look at Mona and Michelle. "How is your investigation going?" "We have checked all the people with a history of sexual assault near the crime scene." Michelle shook her head. "That area belongs to the wealthy area. There are not many such people, and they all have alibis at the time of the crime." Roan picked up the teacup and took a sip. "Very good. We have ruled out another useless clue." Lassie, who was sitting in the chair, was speechless when she heard this. "But the key problem is that we haven't found a useful clue until now." "No, now there is a useful clue." Without waiting for Roan to speak, Mona next to him suddenly raised her hand. "The trace examination department found the fingerprints of a third person besides Madeline Allen and Nanny Samira on the back door handle." Roan and Lassie immediately came over. "Who is it?" "Dagny Moses." Mona tapped on the keyboard with her 10 fingers and brought up a photo of a skinny gloomy white woman. "She is the cousin of the nanny Samira. She was jailed for theft a few months ago and stole jewelry from Madeline Allen's house. A female thief." Roan glanced at the face in the photo and asked, "Does this woman have a criminal record?" "Yes, and quite a few." Mona brought up the other party's criminal record on the computer desktop. 1 count of illegal possession of a firearm, several counts of intentional injury, multiple counts of theft, possession of unique drugs, trafficking of unique drugs and many other charges. Looking at the acne on Dagny Moses' face and the many marks on her arms in the most recent photo taken in prison, Lassie's face showed a look of disgust. "It looks like another drug addict. The drug addict Polly who sold her son for drug money and didn't care whether her son died or not really left a deep impression on them." Chapter 256. If you really don't have money to buy flour, kidnapping the daughter of your cousin's employer is indeed a good idea. Roan drank the remaining tea in the cup in one gulp and asked, "Do you know where the lady in prison is now?" "Of course." Mona called up an address. "This is the home of an aunt of the nanny Samira. Her aunt is almost 80 years old this year. This old lady is also the aunt of Dagny Moses. She eats and lives there most of the time." "Lassie, contact SWAT." Roan didn't waste any words and immediately got up and walked to the equipment room. "Tell them to send a team to go to the old lady's house with us to get rid of the insects." "No problem." Lassie raised her hand to make an OK gesture and immediately took out her mobile phone to make a call. Outside a reddish-brown bungalow in an ordinary community in South Los Angeles, an ordinary black car slowly stopped at the door of the neighbor's house diagonally opposite the bungalow. After a moment, the car window slowly rolled down, and a black muzzle of a gun stretched out from the car, aiming directly at the reddish-brown bungalow. The SWAT team member, with his eyes fixed on the sniper scope, turned on the communicator and whispered, "We have arrived at the designated location. Please give instructions." "Received. Please stand by." In a black troop carrier at the back door of the reddish-brown bungalow, Luo An turned off the communicator, looked up at the other SWAT team members in the car, and said seriously, "Everyone, we must reduce the noise during this operation. If the suspect finds something unusual, she is very likely to hurt the child." In addition, our main target is the child, so we must control the suspect as soon as possible and not give her the opportunity to contact the child. Okay. Understood. Lassie and the SWAT team members nodded in agreement. The Federation is a very two-faced country. On the one hand, it attaches great importance to the rights of children and regards them as little angels who have fallen to the mortal world. On the other hand, crimes against children and the Federation are also among the highest in the world. At this moment, the contact group on Luo An suddenly rang, and the sniper in the car said, "I saw the target person, Dagny Moses. She is now in the front hall of the house with an old woman." Good. Luo An stopped talking nonsense, took out the Glock 18, turned on the safety, and said coldly, "Start the action." As the voice fell, a group of SWAT team members immediately divided into two teams, following Luo An and Lacey slowly approaching the reddish-brown bungalow. The two teams gradually approached the reddish-brown bungalow from the left and right. The team led by Lacey bent down and gradually stopped at the location of a bedroom in the bungalow. A SWAT team member stepped forward, slowly looked at the scene in the bedroom, and whispered, "No one in the room." Lassie didn't waste any words. "Enter immediately." On the other side, Luo An led several SWAT team members to the back door of the bungalow. A SWAT team member immediately stepped forward and quietly opened the back door. At this moment, the voice of a sniper suddenly rang through the communicator. "Everyone, Dagny Moses has begun to leave the living room and go to the kitchen." Hearing this, Lassie immediately led the SWAT team members to rush into the house quickly and suddenly appeared in front of Dagny Moses. "Don't move. Put your hands up." The sudden appearance of Lassie and the two SWAT team members scared Dagny Moses. After raising her hands subconsciously, Dagny Moses suddenly pushed the old woman next to her towards Lassie and the others and turned around and ran away. Fouquet. Lassie and a SWAT team member quickly reached out to catch the old woman, and another SWAT team member quickly chased after her with a gun. Dagny Moses' escape direction was not the front or back door of the house, but another bedroom not far away. But just as she ran to the door of the bedroom, Roan suddenly appeared at the corner and kicked Dagny Moses in the waist. Bang! Dagny Moses fell to the ground without reacting at all. When she looked up with her hands on her waist and a look of pain on her face, a SWAT team member behind Roan had already taken out handcuffs and handcuffed Dagny Moses' hands. "Eat shit, you bunch of %. Selectively ignoring the swear words that came out of Dagny Moses' mouth, Roan walked into the bedroom and searched briefly. He didn't find the little girl, but only found 2 small bags of flour and a few bags of leaves. Roan nodded in understanding. It seemed that Dagny Moses didn't want to escape just now, but wanted to throw these things into the toilet and destroy them. On the other side, Lassie led the remaining SWAT members to quickly check every room in the house, and soon their faces became very ugly. Because they only found a 9mm pistol in the basement and did not find the little girl Kara. The 9th hour after Kara disappeared, in the office area of the Special Investigation Team, the 9mm pistol found has been sent to the Trace Examination Department for testing, and the results will be out soon. Lassie pushed open the door and walked into the office area of the investigation team. Seeing that only Mona was in the office area, she pointed to the interrogation room next to it. "Has Roan and Michelle started the interrogation?" "Yes." Mona glanced at the time. "Just entered 5 minutes ago." Lassie glanced at the interrogation room, not knowing what she was thinking. At this time, a woman's somewhat wanton laughter suddenly rang out in the interrogation room. Chapter 346 Kara's father's disposable phone and concealment. Special Investigation Team, Interrogation Room. Dagny Moses, who was thin and almost skinny, with many sores on her arms and face, sat on a chair, looking at Roan and Michelle across the interrogation table with an indifferent expression. "Looking at the acne on your body, you must have been eating flour for quite some time." Seeing that Michelle was ready, Roan crossed his legs and asked with a smile, "We just found 2 bags of methamphetamine and 2 bags of leaves that you hid in your aunt's house. It seems that you can go to prison to recuperate again." "I don't know what you are talking about." Dagny Moses yawned. "Those things are not mine. If they are not yours, could they be your 79-year-old aunt's?" Roan was too lazy to continue talking nonsense with her and asked directly, "Tell me, where did you take Kara?" "Kara? Who is Kara?" Dagny Moses was puzzled when she heard this. When she saw the photo that Michelle threw to her, Dagny Moses suddenly realized it, then raised her head and laughed wantonly. How do you FBI people do things? What's the point of me catching this kid? Roan put the photo of her cousin's death scene in front of her and said coldly, but you have been to Kara's villa today. Seeing the tragic scene in the photo, the smile on Dagny Moses' face disappeared instantly. She asked in a serious tone, is this my cousin? What do you think? Luo An stood up and sat on the interrogation table and asked condescendingly, why did you kill her? No, Dagny Moses shook her head repeatedly. I definitely didn't do this. Okay. I went to see my cousin today, just to borrow money from her. Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly. Borrow money? Well, actually I want money. Dagny Moses shrugged and said that her cousin's employer would give her cousin a large sum of money to buy food every month, and her cousin would always save a lot of money from it. After Dagny Moses learned about this, she had a reason to threaten her cousin, so she went to her cousin every once in a while to ask for some money to spend. Dagny Moses spread her hands. I thought I could keep the secret for the rest of my life, but I didn't expect it to end today. Michelle looked at Dagny Moses calmly, her eyes full of contempt. Roan's eyes moved slightly, and he continued to ask, when did you go to Kara's house today? Around 1:30 in the afternoon. When did you leave? About 2 o'clock. Did you see anyone nearby when you left? No. Having said that, Dagny Moses paused for a moment, then said, but I saw a black book sedan. I wanted to see if there was anything in the car that the owner didn't want, the kind that I could take away, but the car suddenly drove away. Black book. Michelle was shocked, and Roan folded his hands over his chest. Did you see the license plate number? I only remember the last 3 digits. Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Lassie, please send Ms. Dagny Moses to the temporary detention place later. After walking out of the interrogation room, Roan handed the interrogation record to Mona and was about to let Mona check the license plate number that Dagny Moses confessed. Lassie suddenly raised her hand and said, Roan, Kara's father has arrived in Los Angeles. Good. Roan nodded, and Lassie continued, but this Mr. John seems to have some problems. Roan was shocked when he heard this and hurried to Lassie and asked, what's the matter? After John got off the plane, the first thing he did was to call Kara's mother, Ellen. Lassie turned on the monitoring equipment and other equipment that had been set up for Ellen on the table and said, I thought this call was just an ordinary call to report safety, but John's words were very interesting. Roan didn't speak, and Michelle also listened carefully to the voice in the monitoring equipment. First came the voice of Kara's mother, Madeline. Thank God, you finally arrived in Los Angeles. John on the other end of the phone said in a calm tone, the FBI has been here, right? Yes. Okay, don't panic. Kara will be absolutely fine. What? You? Madeline wanted to ask in detail, but suddenly realized something, and immediately stopped the topic and instead asked John about how long it would take him to get home from the airport. Wow. Roan sat down on the chair with a raised eyebrow. It seems that our Mr. John seems to know something we don't know. Michelle nodded, and Ms. Madeline is also hiding something from us. You too. I have found something here. At this moment, Mona raised her hand, pointed to her computer and said, I just checked John's itinerary and found that, before he flew to Los Angeles, he bought a disposable mobile phone in a store near the Ohio airport. According to the location, this phone is currently with John. The daughter is missing. The mother asked the FBI for help, but the father bought a disposable mobile phone and told the mother not to be afraid. This matter is getting more and more interesting. Roan became more energetic, thought about it, and asked, can you find out who John has contacted with this disposable phone? No. Mona shook her head and said, disposable phones are encrypted. I can only find out that John did use it to make calls. Roan continued to ask, then can you find out what the phone number of this disposable phone is? Seeing Mona nodded, Roan did not hesitate and said directly, Lassie, call John now, but don't talk. Okay. Lassie immediately understood Roan's idea, picked up a private landline on the special investigation team's table and called John. The phone soon made a beep sound waiting to be answered, and Mona and Michelle moved their chairs to Lassie's side. Click. Soon, the phone was connected. Roan and the other four looked at each other and all raised a finger in front of their mouths. "Hello." Mr. John's male voice came from the other end of the phone. He suppressed his anger and said coldly, "I know you are listening. Listen, I will arrive at your place on time, but you must ensure that my daughter is not hurt at all. If there are wounds on her body, believe me, I will definitely make you regret coming into this world. Did you hear me? Did you hear it?" Click. Lassie hung up the phone directly. Mona and Michelle looked at each other, and Lassie looked up at the two of them, her eyes full of surprise. So, John actually knows who kidnapped his daughter? And he is in contact with the other party. From what he said, it seems that he has agreed on a meeting place with the kidnapper. Roan folded his arms across his chest and leaned back in his chair. After pondering for a few seconds, he asked, "Michelle, check the specific situation of the book sedan that Dagny Moses just mentioned and find its location. Mona, you will track John's itinerary from now on and never let him out of our sight. Lassie, you and I will go to Ms. Madeline's house and we will discuss her ex-husband's affairs with her in detail." "Okay, no problem." Chapter 347 Convincing Madeline Allen. On the way to Kara's house, the dark SUV was speeding forward. Lassie's cell phone on the passenger seat suddenly rang. She pressed the answer button and heard Mona's voice from the other end of the phone. "You too, John has disappeared and I can't find him." "What?" Roan, who was driving, had an unchanged expression. Lassie frowned slightly when she heard it. "When did it happen? Where did he disappear?" 3 minutes ago, the place of disappearance was on the road next to the Los Angeles airport. Mona on the other end of the phone sounded a little annoyed. "It was just a traffic light, and John's figure completely disappeared." Lassie sighed. "The daughter disappeared first, and the father disappeared again. This case today is too lively." Roan ignored Lassie's sigh. He grabbed the phone and asked, "Michelle, how is your investigation going?" "Still working hard." "Good." Roan continued. "Mona, while you are looking for where John has gone, carefully investigate John's past resume and his bank account to see if he has withdrawn any money recently." "Okay." After hanging up the phone and throwing the phone back to Lassie, Roan stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, and the black SUV moved forward a few points faster. 5 minutes later, Kara's home. "Good evening, Ms. Madeline." Entering the villa with Lassie, Roan asked directly, "Where is your ex-husband now?" "My ex-husband? Do you mean John?" Madeline Allen was slightly stunned and then hurriedly explained, "He is on his way here." While Madeline Allen was talking, Roan had been observing her expression and movements. It can be seen that she was not lying. She really thought John was driving here. Lassie and Roan looked at each other, pulled Allen to sit on the sofa, and whispered, "Ms. Madeline, according to our investigation, your ex-husband John just disappeared. Do you know where he is most likely to go?" "John is missing." Madeline Allen's pupils shrank when she heard this, and then she thought of something. Her expression calmed down, and she shook her head and said, "Impossible. He just called me and said that there was a bit of traffic on the road, but he will be here soon." Seeing this, Roan's mouth twitched slightly. He didn't waste any more time and asked directly, "Ms. Madeline, do you really think that your ex-husband alone can bring your daughter back?" Madeline Allen subconsciously looked up at Roan, and seeing Roan's eyes, she hurriedly turned to look at Lassie. "Sorry, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, I don't understand what you mean." "No, you understand, you just don't want to admit it." Roan sat on the chair, staring at Madeline Allen, and said in a deep voice, "We know that John promised you that he would bring your daughter back, but have you ever thought about a question? The guy who kidnapped your daughter is most likely not one person, but a group of people. Does John really have the ability to escape from a group of enemies with his daughter? In addition, the other party killed the nanny Samira in order to kidnap your daughter. It is obvious that the other party does not care about human life at all. Enough! Exclamation mark. As Roan spoke, Madeline Allen began to tremble, and her eyes quickly turned red. She suddenly stopped Roan from speaking loudly, and said in a serious tone, "I believe John." Lassie was furious when she saw this. Just as she was about to speak, Roan grabbed her hand and asked, "Ms. Madeline, are you sure?" Madeline Allen did not answer. Her eyes unconsciously swept left and right. It was obvious that she took Roan's words to heart, but her ex-husband's confident assurance made her unable to ignore it. She continued to struggle without knowing what to do. Roan could understand Madeline's mentality and actions for her daughter, but her current behavior had obviously hindered her from handling the case. After pondering for a moment, Roan's eyes flashed with a gleam. He took out a mobile phone from his pocket and said in a deep voice, "According to the federal child protection law, the mandatory reporting requirements for child abuse and neglect, as well as the performance of Mr. John and Ms. Madeline in this case, we now have sufficient reason to suspect that Mr. John is the main suspect in the kidnapping of Kara, and Ms. Madeline has been deceived by the other party and cannot make the correct judgment in favor of Kara's life safety. In view of the above situation, according to federal law, the FBI has the right to temporarily deprive Ms. Madeline of her dominant position in this case, and the next actions will be based on the judgment of the FBI. Lassie, immediately issue a wanted warrant for John Rodriguez. Let all law enforcement agencies in Los Angeles hunt down John Rodriguez with all their strength." "No problem." Lassie, who understood the look Roan gave her, immediately got up from the sofa, agreed loudly, and took out her mobile phone to make a call. "No, you can't do this." Hearing Roan's words and seeing Lassie's actions, Madeline Allen panicked and stood up and shouted, "You can't do this. You don't have the power." Roan spread his hands and said, "Sorry, when the parents of the child cannot make the right judgment, the federal law supports me to do this." The federal law in 2005 was still mild. If in a dozen years, some school teachers secretly encouraged children to take drugs or use physical means to change their gender directly, and the parents knew about it and took it to court, the court would deprive the parents of their custody rights. The reason is that the parents discriminate by personality and don't know the gender alias. Madeline Allen didn't know the magical world of the future. She only knew that if Roan really issued a warrant for John now, it would be unpredictable whether her daughter could come back. "I really don't know where John is now." Staring at Roan for a moment, Madeline Allen begged, "Please, I really don't know where he is. I just want my daughter to come back safely. Then please cooperate with us, Ms. Madeline." Roan poured a glass of water and handed it to her. "Time waits for no one. If we delay any longer, none of us know what will happen." After a long silence, Madeline Allen whispered, "In an area south of the Los Angeles airport, John once had a house there. I don't know if it is still there now." Madeline Allen said that this house was secretly found when she and John just got married. She thought John had cheated on her, and John didn't know about it. "Good." Taking out a pen and paper, Roan gestured to the two female agents to guard the place, and immediately drove away from the villa with Lassie. On the way, Roan took out his cell phone and called Mona. "How is it? Have you found John?" "Still working on it." Mona on the other end of the phone was typing frantically on the computer keyboard. "I already have an idea, give me some more time." "Okay, thank you for your hard work." After hanging up the phone, Roan drove the south quickly towards the house that Madeline mentioned. 10 minutes later, Roan and Lassie came to an ordinary community and found a room that looked even more ordinary. No one is in the room. Holding a pistol, Roan approached the door of the room on the left and right, made a quick judgment, and then entered the room with Lassie. "It looks like no one has lived here for a long time." Lassie wiped the dust off the coffee table and put away the pistol. "It doesn't look like anyone has been here. It seems we found the wrong place." No. Roan looked at the painting hanging on the wall of the bathroom and smiled. "We found the right place." Chapter 348 John's True Identity. South of Los Angeles Airport, in an ordinary room in a community. Hearing Roan's words, Lassie immediately walked into the bathroom and followed his gaze to the painting on the wall. It was a very ordinary and common landscape painting, but the striking thing was that the painting was slightly concave. Lassie gave Roan a thumbs up, raised her hand to pick up the painting, and a black combination lock safe appeared in front of them. A big surprise. Lassie threw the painting aside. Luo An came over and knocked on the safe, then turned around and asked, "Ask the people from the trace examination department to open the gift box." "Okay." Lassie took out her cell phone and contacted the agents from the trace examination department. While waiting for the agents from the trace examination department to arrive, Luo An called Michelle. "How is your investigation going?" I found the black book sedan mentioned by drug addict Dagny Moses in a camera south of Alan's villa area. Michelle sighed from the other end of the phone, but unfortunately, the black book used someone else's license plate, and the real owner of that license plate has been at work. Luo An frowned slightly when he heard this. Can you see the face of the driver of the black book clearly in the camera? Not clearly. Michelle manipulated the mouse to zoom in on the surveillance footage, but Mona helped me improve the image quality recorded by the surveillance camera. There was a driver in the front of the black book, and there was another person sitting in the back seat. It looks like a gang crime. Luo An nodded, pondered for a few seconds, and added, keep looking for that book, and see where it was last seen. No problem. Not long after hanging up the phone, the people from the trace inspection department also arrived here. A few minutes later, the agents from the trace inspection department carrying professional equipment successfully opened this old-fashioned combination lock safe. Great. Luo An grinned and gave the agent from the trace inspection department a thumbs up, then looked at the professional tools in the other's hand, his eyes flashing, and I don't know what he was thinking. Thank you, you've worked hard. Lassie thanked the agent from the trace inspection department and opened the door of the safe. There was only a locked metal box inside. Naturally, there was no need for the agents from the trace inspection department to take action on this box. Luo An walked forward and took only a dozen seconds to remove the lock from the box. X2 Lassie and the agents from the trace inspection department were speechless when they saw the lock thrown aside. Luo An ignored their looks and immediately opened the metal box. After removing the padlock, there wasn't much in the metal box, except for several stacks of about $70,000, a fully loaded 9mm pistol, and 5 different social security cards, driver's licenses, and passports. The names on them were different, but the face was the same person, John Rodriguez. Wow, it looks like we found a spy. Lassie carefully checked the driver's license and passport and found that they didn't look fake. Seeing this, Roan took out his cell phone and called Mona. Mona, please take a moment to check the authenticity of these documents. According to the document numbers Lassie described on the phone, Mona's 10 fingers flew on the computer and quickly found out the status of these documents. Unfortunately, these documents are all real. They are all genuine documents issued by the federal government. This is really not surprising news. Roan sat down on the sofa in the living room and asked, then who is our Mr. John's true identity? John Rodriguez, this is his true identity. Mona on the other end of the phone looked at the information in the computer and replied, under this name, I found his birth certificate, childhood photos, and medical insurance information. This news is a bit surprising. Roan raised his eyebrows, and Lassie next to him asked, so, who is John Rodriguez? A spy? An agent? Mona handed the phone to Michelle. I don't know. Michelle is checking. The National Security Agency and the Department of Homeland Security have replied to me, saying that John is not their man. Michelle put down the landline phone in her hand and was about to continue talking when another landline phone suddenly rang. Picking up the phone, Michelle nodded and answered a few words, then covered the landline phone and said to Mona's mobile phone, the CIA said that John is their senior agent and asked our special investigation team to immediately stop the current case handling activities. It's these troublemakers again. Hearing Michelle's words, Mona and Lassie rolled their eyes. Luo An glared at Lassie when he heard the words and spoke without thinking. If the CIA is a troublemaker, what are we? After a second of silence, Roan said seriously to the phone, Michelle, tell the CIA group that our operation cannot be stopped. If you have any request, come to my place to discuss it face to face. In addition, briefly tell them that John is now missing and ask them for John's information. If you don't give it to them, if there are any problems with John and Kara during this period, all responsibilities will be borne by the CIA. Michelle immediately repeated Roan's words to the other party. Mona, who was holding a mobile phone next to her, had a glittering look in her eyes. She liked Roan's domineering look. Lassie and the agent of the Trace Examination Department also gave Roan a thumbs up when they heard this. After a few seconds, Michelle's voice sounded again. Deputy Team Leader Roan, John's superior asked where you are now. He wants to meet with you in person to discuss this matter. After Michelle's voice fell, although Mona and Lassie were far away, they all showed beautiful smiles on their faces. Roan's expression remained unchanged. He glanced at the room that had been searched and had nothing useful left. He said, "No need to come here. Go directly to our special investigation team. Lassie and I will be back soon." Half an hour later, in the meeting room of the special investigation team, John is our most capable agent in South America. John's superior was an elderly white man with a stern face and a black suit named Wanda. He crossed his legs and looked at Roan expressionlessly. He returned to the Federation for his family, which is a great loss to us. Seeing that the other party had been looking at him coldly, Roan's face also turned cold, and he asked expressionlessly, "So, John is not an active agent now? He is mainly responsible for management matters now." Wanda asked back, "Why are you investigating John this time?" Roan did not answer, but just gave Lassie next to him a look. Lassie immediately opened the recording of the conversation between John and his wife Ellen after he got off the plane. After the recording was played, Luo An said in a cold voice, "John's daughter was kidnapped." It is not difficult to hear from the recording that John has been in contact with the kidnapper and even knows who the kidnapper is. As John's superior, what do you think about this? After listening to the recording, Wanda's eyes quickly sank. Regarding Luo An's question, he pondered for a few seconds and said, "I should know who the other party is. It is likely that they are a group of guys from South America who are seeking revenge on John." Luo An crossed his legs and leaned back. "Can you explain it in detail?" Chapter 349. People are not important. Brains are important. Special investigation team, in the meeting room. "Do you know Diego Rodriguez de Silva?" Wanda did not answer Roan's question directly, but asked him instead. Roan did not answer either, just looked at Wanda quietly. "I know him." Just as the air gradually became quiet, Lassie nodded and said, "A few years ago, there was a large gang in a small country in South America. Their main business was gambling, and they transported a large amount of gambling to the Federation every year. This Diego Rodriguez de Silva is the gang leader of this gang." "That's right." Wanda gave Lassie a "you are very good" look, and then explained, "For the Federation, John led his teammates to eliminate Diego Rodriguez de Silva a few years ago. But Diego's youngest son escaped, and this incident should be the revenge of this youngest son on John." "Yeah." After listening to Wanda's explanation, Lassie nodded suddenly, and Roan also nodded slightly. On the surface, Roan seemed to accept this background story, but in fact he didn't believe a word of it. The whole world knows about the CIA's behavior outside the Federation. Compared to what Wanda said for the Federation, Roan is more willing to believe that John led people to kill the gang leader just to support a guy who is more cooperative with the CIA. Roan even chose not to believe that John led people to kill the gang leader. The first time he saw Wanda, Roan saw that this old guy was thick-skinned and must have been used to lying. God knows if what he just said was fabricated, or he blamed John for what others did. This possibility is not small. Not wanting to get to the bottom of things with the CIA guys who lied all the time and 9 out of 10 of their statements were lies, Roan asked directly. Now John is facing the kidnappers alone. "Do you know where they are hiding?" "No." Wanda shook his head first, then stood up from his chair and buttoned up his suit, saying coldly, "But I know the locations of several safe houses that John has set up in Los Angeles. We will definitely be able to find John in those places." Roan and Lassie also stood up from their chairs after hearing this. Roan just glanced at the question revealed in Wanda's words and didn't say much. It can only be said that it is worthy of being the CIA. It has become their habit to keep out the outsiders and keep the insiders inside. Special investigation team, office area. As Wanda mentioned the locations of several safe houses, Mona soon found John in a corner store and discovered what car John was driving and the license plate number of the car. Seeing that Mona only took a few minutes to locate John's current location based on the license plate number, completing the work that had not been completed for so long, Roan's eyebrows jumped and he looked at Wanda calmly. Sure enough, a backstabbed teammate is far more deadly than a terrifying enemy. Safe houses cannot be used again after being exposed once, and Wanda actually exposed so many safe houses for John this time. Roan's eyes flashed with a gleam, and he said, "It seems that your CIA attaches great importance to John." Wanda crossed his arms in front of his chest and did not answer. After a long silence, he said, "John is a hero of our CIA. He should not die at the hands of these Avengers." Hearing Wanda's words, Roan's face did not change, but he laughed in his heart. This group of CIA is really hypocritical. Roan dared to guarantee that, if Mona told the news that John was dead now, Wanda would never feel sad, but would immediately find a way to silence those people in the name of revenge for John. John himself is not important. As a former CIA agent and current CIA manager, the information he knows in his head is the most important. What Wanda fears most now is not John's death, but his capture. Once John is controlled by the kidnappers, no one knows whether John will not be able to withstand the torture and reveal some information that Wanda does not want him to say. There are many people who defect from the Federation every year, and there are also many CIAs. The culture of the Federation has always been centered on individuals or families, and the country and national interests are only ranked third compared to these two. Although Luo An despised Wanda, he did not want to expose his plan. The top priority now is to find John and Kara as soon as possible and catch the murderers who kidnapped Kara. "Everyone, I found where John's car is." At this time, Mona suddenly shouted, "On a highway in the southeast of Los Angeles, he is driving straight in that direction. There is an abandoned industrial park not far ahead of that highway, which is very suitable for hiding or ambush." When talking about ambush, Luo An glanced at Wanda calmly, and indeed saw that Wanda's eyelids trembled subconsciously. Laughing in his heart, Roan took Lassie and Michelle and walked quickly into the equipment room and said loudly, "Mona, keep locating and monitoring John's status. In addition, contact SWAT and have them go to John's location as quickly as possible." Understood. Mona immediately picked up the landline and started to call, and Wanda also took out his mobile phone and pressed it. When Roan, Lassie and Michelle were fully armed and took their weapons, Wanda quickly followed and said seriously, "I will go with you in this operation." Roan glanced at Mona behind Wanda and saw her making an okay gesture. He immediately nodded and agreed to take him to the elevator. "Okay, but you don't have the right to command on the scene." Of course. The 15th hour of Kara's disappearance. Two black SWAT transport vehicles sped forward on the streets of Los Angeles. Roan drove the sub closely behind them and soon surpassed them. Lassie sat in the co-pilot seat and Michelle sat in the back seat of the car, looking down and checking the equipment in silence. Wanda was also sitting in the back seat of the car, watching the scenery outside the car rapidly receding, and Roan's miraculous overtaking at various strange angles. The older Wanda's face gradually turned pale, and his tone was no longer as calm as before. He trembled a little and pulled the seatbelt tightly, saying, "Deputy Captain Greenwood, there is no need to drive so fast. Pay more attention to safety." "What? Not fast enough?" Seeing that Wanda was just a little scared, and not to the point of physical discomfort, Roan selectively misheard what the other party said, grinned, and stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, and the SUV's forward speed increased by another level. "Don't worry. We will definitely arrive at the scene before John dies." Wanda didn't say anything, just watched the scenery outside the car rapidly receding, and tightened his seatbelt a few more points. After checking her equipment, Lassie, who was sitting in the passenger seat, followed Roan's instructions, took out her cell phone and called Mona. "How is it? The location shows where John is now. In the abandoned industrial park that you guessed before, Roan." Mona on the other end of the phone tapped the keyboard a few times and said, 3 minutes ago, John parked the car there." "Good." Roan simply calculated the driving time and said, "It will take another 5 minutes for us to reach the industrial park." "Okay, be careful." Mona simply said something and hung up the phone. Lassie was about to put her phone away when it suddenly rang again. "It's me again, Mona." Lassie pressed the answer button, and Mona on the other end of the phone said in a hurried tone, "Just now, LAPD received a report. The reporter said that there was fierce gunfire in the industrial park you were going to." Chapter 350 Abandoned Industrial Park, Packer, SR-25. Shit. In the SUV that was moving forward like black lightning, Roan's expression remained unchanged when he heard Mona's words. Lassie was speaking sweet words. Michelle frowned, and Wanda didn't say anything. The SUV was moving too fast, and he had closed his eyes and was lost in thought. Mona, continue to monitor the situation near the industrial park. Without any nonsense, Roan signaled Lassie to turn off her phone, then pressed the communicator and said to the SWAT team members seriously, "Everyone, the target location has been confirmed, the abandoned industrial park. If you encounter rebels, after arriving at the scene, you are allowed to kill them on the spot. Repeat, you are allowed to kill them on the spot. Understood?" XN. After turning off the communicator, Roan turned the steering wheel and stepped on the accelerator. The SUV immediately passed through the two passers-by and the astonished eyes of them. 5 minutes later, the SUV driven by Roan arrived at the abandoned industrial park first and saw the car driven by John. He opened the safety of the Glock 18 and got out of the car. At this time, the industrial park was extremely quiet and there was no sound of gunfire at all. "Michelle, you stay here and wait for the SWAT team and go inside with them." Luo An grabbed Michelle, who was suppressing his discomfort and preparing to move forward with a gun, pointed at Wanda who was still sitting in the car to relax, and whispered, "Also, pay more attention to Wanda's safety." Hearing the word safety from Luo An's mouth and seeing the look Luo An gave him, Michelle immediately understood the true meaning of Luo An's words and nodded seriously. "Okay, I promise to complete the mission." "Good." Luo An patted Michelle's arm with satisfaction and then walked slowly into the industrial park with Lacey in a vigilant posture. "Pay attention to the corners." Because he was not sure how many enemies there were, for Lacey's safety, Luo An did not choose to split his troops into two groups, but he and Lacey stayed close to each other in front and behind, and carefully and slowly explored the situation in the industrial park. Slowly walking past the two factories in front, Luo An and Lacey did not find anything except a pile of waste. When they reached the end of the second factory building, Lassie and Roan suddenly stopped because in the open space between the second and third factories, there were 4 guys holding rifles, wearing bulletproof vests, with their heads covered and their faces obscured, revealing only their eyes. With this outfit, I thought I had entered a drug dealer's den in South America. Lassie looked at the 4 people and complained in a low voice. Roan pointed at the bulletproof vests on the 4 people and laughed in a low voice. "The drug dealers in South America can't afford Packers bulletproof vests." Packer, the full name of Protective Apparel Corporation of America, is one of the pioneers in the law enforcement, military and private security markets. It provides a variety of high-quality bulletproof and knife protection products for law enforcement officials and special forces. At the same time, the price is not cheap. Far from what ordinary people can afford. "Really?" Lassie was slightly stunned when she heard this, and then frowned slightly, because the bulletproof vests on the other party were not much different from the bulletproof vests on her and Roan. It seems that there are some other circumstances behind this case that we don't know about. Luo An carefully observed the situation, pondered for a few seconds, pointed to another direction and said, "Wait here for a while, I'll go to that direction to check the situation. If there is a gunshot in that direction, you can fire 2 shots to attract attention while ensuring your safety, then exit the area and wait for the SWAT team to arrive before moving with them." "Okay." Lassie wanted to refuse, but considering the difference between her skills and the other party's hand, she was silent for a long time and looked at Luo An deeply and said in a deep voice, "Be careful. Don't worry, believe me." Luo An grinned and ran quickly to the shadow not far away, and then his figure flashed and disappeared in front of Lassie. Seeing that Luo An had completely disappeared, Lassie took a deep breath, silently prayed to God for him, and then took the gun to find a hidden place and slowly hid. The place where Luo An went was one of the commanding heights of this industrial park, and that position just happened to be able to see the specific situation inside the number 3 factory building. Anyone who has a little knowledge of military knowledge can see the importance of this commanding height. These guys wearing Packer bulletproof vests are obviously not ordinary people, so this commanding height must be defended by someone. But Luo An is not in a hurry, because this commanding height is not large, and can only accommodate 2 people at most. There is a small blind spot below the commanding height, and the place is a bit small, but Luo An simply judged that it is enough for him to climb up. A commanding height grabbing mission. Luo An, hiding in the shadows, looked at the slight bulge on the commanding height, twisted his wrist, grinned, took out a bottle of hemostatic potion and a bottle of swift potion, and poured them into his stomach. The next second, Luo An's figure disappeared from the spot like a ghost. On the other side, at the commanding height, a man with a short haircut and a hooked nose, and a man with the same short haircut, but a scar at the corner of his eye, and holding a telescope, lay on the platform and carefully observed the surroundings. The one with the hooked nose was full of joy and stroked the SR-25 sniper rifle in front of him. The SR-25 sniper rifle is a combination of the R-10 and R-15 rifles. 60% of its parts are directly taken from these two rifles. At present, the Federal Army, Navy, Marines and some private military contractors are equipped with the SR-25 sniper rifle. It is one of the preferred weapons for special forces and business forces, and has received high praise for both civilian competition and military use. After working for so many years, it is the first time that Hooknose has used such a good and new sniper rifle. If he only had the opportunity to use this gun once, Hooknose would not be so excited. The real reason for Hooknose's excitement is that the boss said that the boss heard that he was good at sniping and bought it for him. Thinking that the gun in front of him would belong to him forever in the future, Hooknose smiled with his bad teeth. The man with scars on the corner of his eyes put down the telescope and turned his head in doubt. "Hey, what do you laugh?" The eagle Hooknose wiped his nose, whispered and explained, "I plan to wait for the task to end and take this gun back to beat the bald head that always laughed at me." Then he grabbed the girl in his arms and let him see me. The man with a scar shaking his head silently, using the telescope to observe the surroundings again. At this moment, the intercom next to the scar man with scars on the corner of his eyes suddenly sounded, and a little hoarse voice passed out, "The task is over. Ready to evacuate." The man with scars on the corner of the eyes quickly picked up the intercom and replied. The eagle Hooknose was cautiously groaning SR-25, and the guy with scars on the corner of the eyes also picked up the telescope again. The pupils of the Hooknose shrank suddenly when he reacted. He subconsciously took out a dagger from his waist and prepared to stab behind him, but suddenly found that his hand was grabbed by someone, and at the same time, another hand grabbed his chin. The Hooknose, who knew what the other party was going to do, widened his eyes and struggled frantically to break free from the other party, but the other party's right hand was like an iron clamp, and he couldn't break free at all. Crack, the right hand twisted hard to the right, and under the terrifying force, the Hooknose's neck broke instantly, and then his body limp and died. Fouquet. Luo An's set of actions to help the Hooknose enter a deep sleep was too fast and sharp. The man with the scar on the corner of his eye trembled with eyebrows and was dumbfounded. But now is not the time to hesitate. The man with the scar on the corner of his eye was anxious but not panicked. The moment before the Hooknose fell to the ground, he had already taken out a pistol and aimed at Luo An. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.